The boy was sitting on a tree and looking at the sky when someone called him. A girl appeared under the tree who looked unhappy about something. Yustafa's father was looking for him. The girl didn't understand why he climbed the tree every time. The answer was simple. The young man promised that he would come down soon. The blonde didn't change her mood. The hero really didn't make any effort at all. This was already going beyond the pale. They have different blood, but the lady really tried. In fact, even so, from the very beginning, she did not hope for a warm relationship. The girl was about to leave, but before she could, Yusuf accidentally fell, and that's how the main character's half-sister on his father's side died. In fact, the loss was not great. The girl was one of the villains of the novel written by the author. The blonde opened her eyes abruptly. She didn't believe it. It seemed like what had happened was a dream, but it was quite difficult to believe it. However, the body still cannot get used to it. A little earlier, when the lady got into the novel, her soul was transferred to the daughter of the stepmother who caused the main character trauma. Ran Bromija de Lazia was that very daughter. She came to this house with the woman who married the Duke. The girl did not have a drop of the master's blood. She was not related to him, but the Duke, head over heels in love, happily added Ran to his family. Before the heroine got into the novel, she was an ordinary graduate student. One day, she was returning home from her parents and got into an accident. No one could have imagined that thanks to the incident, she would end up in the novel that the girl herself wrote. The blonde realized her name when she woke up in a new body. At first, she thought that she could easily get out because everything was familiar to her. The problem that arose was that the lady found herself in the novel at a time when there were still about 7 years before the story began. The woman did not understand how to behave. While she was thinking, there was a knock on the door of the room, and then a scream was heard. The mother appeared on the threshold. She thought that the girl had died after what had happened and was happy that everything was okay. She needed to rest. Ran tried to explain that she was okay, but no one really listened to her. Both her mother and Tass, her younger brother, were worried about the girl. As far as I remembered, in the original, the Duchess gave birth to a boy, and after that, she began to make life difficult for the son of the Duke's ex-wife, Yustafa. Now she was furious. She was going to teach the boy a lesson. One of the options was to hire some strict teacher. The blonde screamed again that she was okay because she knew that the teacher would leave the boy traumatized. She should have refused. The heroine came up with another option. The young man could be sent to the academy in the morning. That way he would be a little further away and wouldn't get in the way. Mother nodded. Rand turned out to be smart. Everything should be better this way. Yus probably also wanted to get out of the house. Although some controversy arose, in the end the hero still left for the Imperial Academy. He simply had no other choice. The blonde thought that everything would be fine, but then, 4 years later, her parents and Tass died in a carriage accident. The worst thing is that the girl knew about it. The woman couldn't prevent anything. In the novel, the tragedy took place on a ship, so the blonde thought she could play out her story. The day of the funeral arrived, and among many acquaintances, the lady noticed a man with dark hair in a dark blue academy uniform. Their eyes met by chance, and the maiden almost immediately turned away. Although she understood that this was wrong, this man should be lured to the Duchess's side at any cost. The brunette approached. He noticed that his sister was not feeling well. They should go back. The lady nodded, although she noticed that her face was too cold for someone who was worried. The family of the Duke of Latium is a line with a longer history than the empire itself. Even when the continent is plunged into war, the emperor and feudal lords may be changed, but the family with the endlessly high mountain ranges in the background never ceased to nobly maintain its place. The master's castle was a work of art created by the hands of a magician. In the ice wall, the great sage Ibria left a sealed, dazzling, snow-white door, cleansed of darkness. Now the family is on the verge of collapse. Winter has been going on for 6 months, so the land is infertile. Latium is famous not only for its castle. There is an emerald crown of life. Green was considered a precious color. The crown, which was valuable, belonged to the owner, and, as if bringing the blessing of life energy, was originally created with the intention of increasing her favors. Although Mother Ran was the head of the house, she hated her. She wore crowns made of rubies. It was a kind of protest. The real heir, Yustaf, is not yet an adult, but he is still very capable because he is the main character. There was a problem. His uncle, Baron Lindbog, not only wanted to take away his entire inheritance, but also decided to force the guy to marry his daughter in order to kill him later. The maiden was thinking about how to prevent all this. Something strange was felt. Ross, the master's personal knight, stared at the lady. Mustafa definitely needed to be protected, having found the right way. The heroine turned to her brother. He immediately responded. The green-eyed girl said that she was on the side of truth and wanted it to be known. When they walked away to the carriage, the girl said what she wanted. Apparently, her aunt and uncle were going to make Ran the head of the family, so she would agree. She would make sure that they couldn't lay a finger on the property. Once the plan is completed, the girl plans to hand over all the property to Mustafa as the one who is the official heir. The young man got into the carriage, and Ross immediately asked what the fox had said. Upon learning the truth, he grimaced with displeasure. Her behavior was strange. The girl returned home and set out to carry out her plan. The most important thing first being to gain recognition as the head of the family. The woman arrived at the official meeting, where more than 10 people were already waiting for her at a long table. The blonde realized that it was a good thing she had pulled her veil down lower so they couldn't see her facial expression. It was safer. There's a blue flame. This is the ring of the family. If someone other than the head puts it on his finger, something terrible will happen. A person who is not recognized as an official successor will burn, and the ring will only fully accept as its owner the one who knows the name of the spirit. All those gathered glorified the blue flame, a greeting that is said only to the head of the Latian clan. The woman is already halfway there. Uncle began to speak, asking to start the meeting. The reason for the meeting was generally obvious. Everyone knew what the conversation would be about. The man began to play his role, his heart breaking at the thought that his older brother's family was no longer with them. Others in the hall, of course, objected. The Duke's line remains alive. Yusuf is still a minor, so the head of the family will be Ran, who is capable of this. Someone was against such a development of events. Even though the lady has the same surname, she does not have ducal blood in her. She cannot become the head. You can forget about that. The blonde decided to intervene. She knows perfectly well that there are also those in the room who are against her becoming the head. They have their own reasons. Yes is still a minor. That's true. He needs help to wait until the moment when he can take his rightful place. The beauty smiled when she looked at her brother. Until he grows up, she will always be on his side and will try to help. The woman presented her point of view to those gathered. She intended to be the head for only 2 years. These were temporary measures. When the lady sat down at the table, whispers were heard. They can be understood, but if the problem is in the blood, the girl asked the guy to give her the ring. Yusuf hesitated at first, but then he finally held out the ring that was hanging on a chain. No one had ever told the woman a name, but she didn't need it. She wrote a novel and knows everything. A blue light flashed around, and immediately everyone around reacted, perhaps too harshly. Everything was spinning so much that it was becoming ill, but the girl did not lose her composure and ordered Istalif to stop. A second later, everything stopped. It became easier, but the people around were even more surprised. No one believed that she put on the ring, not being a blood relative. All this meant was that the blue flame had chosen the lady as the mistress of the family, and now she had the right to become the head at the official level. The woman was truly happy that she would now become the head, albeit for a short time. She was going to hand over the reins of power to Mustafa as soon as the time came. There was no need to address her by status, and there was no point in greeting the blue flame. The lady wasn't planning on staying long anyway. There are 3 families that revere the Duke of Latium. The Wild, Lance, and Illuminate are important, but even they cannot fully swear their allegiance. Wild, as the lady noted long ago, is probably on Mustafa's side. Baron Lance is incredibly honest, so he will not betray, but there will still be a third count, the main problem. The meeting was finally over. Everyone had left, and it seemed as if everything was calm, at least relatively. Only Yus remained. The man asked his sister how she managed to make the blue flame appear and obey. The girl shrugged, saying that she was just lucky. The blonde knew she would make her family happy, but she still had tasks that weren't completed. For example, she needed to find a second male lead. I had to start by paying off my debts. Everything had to be done with the help of the ice wall mine. Inside it, there is a huge amount of mana. In the original work, the heroine learned about it much later, and the girl also did not remember where exactly it was located, although she wrote about it herself. Yus distracted Ran from his thoughts. He was going to return to the academy. He still had graduation ahead of him that he couldn't miss. Since the girl took on the temporary role of leader, the young man could not miss the rest. Before leaving, he repeated the phrase again. Hail to the blue flame. The maiden couldn't stand it and started screaming. The ring still belonged to Latium. He shouldn't behave like that, paying homage. The blonde reminded her that they were family and it was time to move on to informal conversation. But then she felt as if she had been struck. The man had never considered Ran a close person. As soon as the door closed, she fell face down on the table. It all lost its meaning. At this rate, if nothing changed, the girl risked being kicked out. It was decided to put money aside little by little, just in case, and it was also decided that Lord Ross would remain in Latium and become the family's temporary guard. The girl went out to see the young man off. She had not yet fully understood how to behave with him, but she sincerely believed in the best outcome. Rand talked with her brother until he followed her into the carriage, and it seemed that this was where he put a bold end to the conversation. Moving on, the lady turned to Lord Ross. He looked skeptically. Nothing new was found in such a look. While Yustaf was at the academy, the young man was supposed to help with all the affairs in the duchy. The woman reminded him of this again. The time had come to begin active work. Initially, the lady was determined, hoping that the outcome would be nothing short of successful. After some time, everything changed. The situation turned out to be worse than expected. The land was leased to loan sharks, which brought problems. Although the Duke's residence was large, there was a lot of useless land on the territory. There was little fertile soil left, and it was also mortgaged. Rand realized that fixing the situation would be more difficult than she thought. Without territories, they risked dying of hunger. Something had to change. The duties were divided into 4 parts. The servants and the butler, who was also responsible for the documents, were in charge of all the affairs inside the castle. The head of the detachment remained responsible for military forces, such as soldiers and knights, while the financier was in charge of finances. Rand had to replace the person in charge of finance because in the novel she described him as a real piece of trash. Elizabeth, the manager, was called almost immediately. She guessed why she had come to the office, but she wanted to hear everything directly. All the signatures on the contracts were forged. There were no reserves, but they wrote that there were. Income and expenses were in complete disarray. The girl first planned to fire the financier. Lord Wayne was ordered to explore the northern mountain range and to pay attention to the caves located nearby. Towards the end of the working day, the lady was completely tired. She sat down to drink tea. When Ross came to her with complaints, he heard that the head was sent for research. For some reason, the brunette thought that they were skillfully trying to get rid of the man, because they sent him somewhere to a door from which it was difficult to escape. Various monsters used to appear frequently near that place. They want to get rid of Mr. Yustafa's military force directly. The woman smiled. She was asked so sincerely that it made her feel even more uneasy. The answer should have been simple. Yus believes in the head of the knights, and the lady supports him. Ross was still dissatisfied. The head did not receive proper training. The woman didn't want her to become a manager, but it all ended that way. Yustaf won't suffer as much as in the story. While they were talking, a loud knock was heard, and the uncle ran into the room. He was clearly upset about something. Before the man got to the main topic, he expressed a desire to appoint a new guard for the lady. Her new man had no sense of loyalty. This man, of course, was stating the obvious. The girl said that Ross was quite enough for her. She would not need any more security. The brunette remained silent, and then asked if the lady knew that her mother was in debt. She had previously wanted to buy herself a necklace, which is why she had unexpectedly borrowed a large sum. A promissory note was placed on the table first. The woman had borrowed a whole 10,000, which meant that the sum was increasing by 1,000 every month. The hero suddenly started talking about something else. Rand was, after all, his niece, and he began to think about turning a blind eye to this debt. They are already blood relatives, but the man would like them to become a real family. Lazia could marry his son. Robbie's cousin is only 5 years older than the heroine, and her uncle didn't see a problem with that. This man lives a dissolute life and probably doesn't think about anything. The woman would have liked to refuse, but in a gentle manner, so as not to make an enemy. The blonde quietly said that it was only because of her debt that she could not get married. The family has other debts. The lady will need a smarter person who will advise something. Obviously, the man was referring to himself. Ross came into the lady's office. It was already dark outside. Business could be continued in the morning. The lady stretched and agreed. Before this, the lady showed the young man a pipe. Every time she would talk to her uncle, everything would be heard perfectly from there. It was not difficult to understand why the lady was showing all this. She sincerely wanted to gain trust in order to be part of the family. The academy was a place created by the Empire to provide high-level education, and noble families without exception sent their offspring there. Parallels of graduates and friends made at the educational institution appeared. From the very beginning, Lazia was one step behind everyone. The first one to enter there, Yus, attracted attention. There are 3 ducal families in the Empire, and of course the most closed is Latium. Thanks to the family's history, the man received more than enough glances. The girl wrote letters to the guy. She wanted him to graduate quickly and come back to help, but he didn't understand whether the reason was true. Ross reported that a detachment of knights had been sent to the cave, and the question immediately arose as to how the lady had learned about it and whether it would help the duchy. The financier's sentence was quickly carried out. Some were happy, some were horrified. Rand ignored everyone. The man had embezzled huge sums of money but spent it all on gambling. Lord Vane arrived to report that they had discovered a cave. The brunette handed over what he was initially supposed to find. A huge mana stone appeared on the table. It had a high level of purity. Creating magical items didn't seem like a difficult task, and creating them was even easier, so the girl planned to do that. Regular mana stones have a fairly low purity, which is why they quickly lose their properties. With the supply of such pure stones, everything will change. Rand didn't think they would be able to find everything so soon. Blaine had worked hard, so now he deserved time to rest. There are still many situations not described in the novel. There are 3 large trading continents on the continent. The lady decided to choose the Golden Rose. Ross asked about the stone. The lady lied that she herself was not entirely sure. They were discovered in the novels much later, so she saw no need to give details. One day, the real Rand went to the door and got lost. Her stepmother said that Yustaf had planned it all, and that was the first time he was punished. Now the heroine combined those memories with information. She was just lucky. Now she had other plans. The lady made sure that she needed to write to her brother. This should have been the end of the guy's difficulties in life, and his worries could have become less. It was necessary to start searching for the second main character. He was a slave, but next year he would end up in illegal fights. There are 2 years left before Yustaf becomes the head. In 6 months he will graduate from the academy and return back to the estate. Brunette read the letter and learned that a lot of debt had accumulated over all this time. It was good that Rand had found the mana stones. They would help with the payments. The dream was realistic. The girl was almost executed because the new head decided that, after all, her life had to end right then. At the most unpleasant moment, the heroine jumped up in bed. The blonde was really experiencing a lot of stress, and all of this was poisoning her life. The Virgin remembered the day when she first realized that she had been reborn. It had surprised her greatly at the time, although later it became clear what was going on. Full understanding came only after Yustaf came a little later to ask for forgiveness. The heroine was in shock when she first met him. The completely emotionless face showed how indifferent this man really was. The thought flashed through his head that Rand had made him like this. The author didn't think when she wrote it, because the story was hard not only for Yustaf, but also for everyone around him. Until the heroine earned his trust, the guy's life was also in danger. The blonde tried to calm herself down. She knew how to change history, and she was going to make everything right. She was ready for her day knowing that she would meet the man from the Golden Rose. Among all the halls of the estate, there was an emerald room for special guests. Although they were not from a noble family, the lady believed that it was important to be there. The girl was greeted by Robori Rabadi. The heroine was a little surprised that it was not even the branch manager who visited her, but the head. Romia, on behalf of Latia, sent a mana stone and a letter. With such stones, changes were supposed to come to the world, and with them huge profits. Before coming to a stranger's house, the woman, of course, found out a lot, and was happy that she was now informed. Although Latium was an ordinary closed ducal family, the girl before the lady who became the head did not have a drop of the duke's blood. No matter how desperate the family was, given their debts, Robori couldn't underestimate them. They got straight to the point, with the heroine declaring she wanted to sell the mana stones. Deva wanted a deposit of 1 million barat, the largest sum Rabadi could possibly put into circulation. Romia clearly knew a lot, to have asked for so much money. The duke had usually imported goods before, but the cost was much lower. After clearing her throat slightly, the lady remarked that this was perhaps too much. The blonde reminded her of their terms and conditions. They couldn't provide a deposit without any information, and they didn't tell her anything about stone mining. The crystals were extracted from an ice wall. The reaction to the words was real, yet the treasures were found on the territory of Latium. There are principles of trust between entrepreneurs, and Romia tried to adhere to them. She asked again about concluding the deal. Rabadi smiled. Latium wants trust, in which they will not have any disagreements. The company always has a choice. The woman pointed to the door. If she refused, it was better to leave immediately. Rand had become the head not long ago, but rumors had already begun to spread that she was not so simple. It was decided that Golden Rose should become permanent, exclusive customers for 1 year. Trust always needs to be tested. It was decided to discuss the details over dinner. A week later, Robori was resting at the ducal estate after a long journey and, of course, decided to climb the mountain herself. The blonde was shocked when she saw everything. The deposits were truly incredibly huge, as the author described in the novel as an abundance. The heroine sincerely hoped that she would be able to begin mining as soon as possible before the onset of winter, at which point the contract could be considered signed. The girl took some stones with her. She promised that the first half of the payment would be transferred very soon. The second half would be in a month. The head decided to take a rest. The assistant brought a letter that was handed to her. When she was about to read it, her nose started bleeding, probably from overwork. After a while, the lady opened her eyes. She was in bed in another room and thought it was a dream, because Yustaf was sitting next to her. He had grown even taller, which meant he would grow even faster. The woman nevertheless greeted her brother, and he immediately stood up. He checked his temperature and realized that everything seemed to be fine. His body had returned to normal. The blonde nodded. She couldn't help but notice that Yus had very beautiful fingers. The brunette asked again, as if he wanted to clarify. The lady continued to speak as if she could not stop talking. Her fingers were long and straight, and therefore beautiful. The man would play musical instruments well. The hero already plays the piano, but only a little. The young man promised that he would play for his sister at the first opportunity, but she noticed that he was bad. The guy didn't respond to the comments. His face remained stony, emotionless. Even in his sleep, Rand couldn't read what was going on in his head. It was time to go back to sleep. The man asked if he should turn off the light, but instead of answering, the lady asked her not to kill him. She would try to raise the duchy from its knees. In the morning, the girl barely opened her eyes. She looked around, asked if it was a dream, and, having received a negative answer, jumped up in fear, not understanding what had happened. Yus decided to call a doctor first. The woman again asked not to kill her, because she was really afraid of it. Suddenly, another thought came to mind. I became curious about how the man ended up in the estate. He was just returning. It was just a coincidence. The academy has what's called early graduation. And before leaving, Romia asked her brother to get high grades, which is exactly what he did. The brunette received a report card and passed his exams a little early. Unless someone better comes along, he will remain first on the list. Finally, the doctor arrived. As expected, the lady was overtired. This is a simple reason after all. That heap of work. The blonde was advised to eat well and rest for at least a few days, but she refused. There was no choice but to take medicine to restore her strength. Yus noted that it would be better to take care of his health. There was only more work to do. It was just beginning, and there was no turning back. Coming closer, the man sat the lady back down on the bed. Lazia had come especially because he had heard that the lady was no longer coping. In any case, the blue-eyed one has fulfilled the conditions of graduation. He is not obliged to stay at the academy any longer. There is no point in that. Everything continued as the lady wrote in the letter, and all the details are described in Elizabeth's documents. Yus read this the day before the meeting. The blonde began to realize what was happening. She quietly asked if there was a man next to her at night. The answer was yes. Romy wished that she would fall through the ground. The night was not a dream, and she had said too much unnecessary things. Now only regrets remained. The woman asked him to forget what she had said. The brunette chuckled. It was the first time he had been told how beautiful his fingers were. The young man got ready to leave and advised him to rest. As soon as the door closed, the lady immediately fell onto the bed and buried her face in the pillow. She asked not to kill her. It could cause unnecessary thoughts. At the same time, it was for the best. The young man learned that they were afraid of him, and he could become at least a little kinder. Every time a new year comes, the Lazia family performs a ritual to protect the door, and this was the year that the stepmother and Rand took part. After the ceremony, Romia and Yus lagged behind a little. That day the girl returned a little late. Apparently then she discovered the mana stones. In fact, killing his sister had never been the young man's priority. After the incident with the chariot, the hero realized that his unreasonable anger would now be directed at himself. Then the hero still experienced shame, anger, pain, and resentment, which filled his consciousness. Now everything switched to the deal. It was quite profitable. Elizabeth agreed with the gentleman that they could act as written on the piece of paper, and he asked how things were going with the search for a new financier. Blue-Eyed described everything as it was. She managed to select the outstanding candidates and passed the information on to the head of the family. Rand seemed to be doing well, but she was overworked, so Yustaf would be handling things for a while. The maid brought the lady a full cup of medicine, and she had to drink it all to the last drop, although it certainly wasn't easy for her. That night, the blonde couldn't find the strength to sleep. She remembered that she had slept for 2 whole days before, and she had been told about this before her meeting with the doctor. The girl decided to go to the library. In the corridor, she accidentally met Elizabeth and began to discuss the documents and how Yustaf was handling them. The man appeared just in time behind her. The sister immediately began to defend the manager. She herself asked to show her everything, and the friend was not guilty of anything. The brunette raised an eyebrow skeptically. The green-eyed girl heard the question. Her brother didn't even blame anyone, but it seemed to her that this was exactly the case at that time Elizabeth decided to go on business. When they were left alone, Romija once again confirmed that the young man had indeed grown even taller. About a month and a half had passed since their last meeting. The girl said that she was going to the library. She wanted to listen to the doctor, but before that, she had slept for 2 whole days and no longer found the strength to rest. I had to apologize for discussing behind his back. The lady wanted to know how things were going, but without answering, the young man dragged her along with him right to the library. First, Ross was ordered to light the fireplace. His legs and hands were really cold. Sitting down in the chair, the lady said that they still had to repay the debt of 10,000 barat. It would be possible to not pay the uncle and get married, but this is not the best option, because the candidate is so terrible that the girl is even disgusted. Yus clarified that if Robbie had turned out to be normal, his sister would have gotten married. If the crystals had not been found, there would have been no way out. They needed the money. In any case, even so, the lady would hardly marry, so that no one would take possession of Latium until she hands over her post and does not intend to look for anyone to marry. The green-eyed girl's hair was disheveled. Yustaf decided to fix it, and she thanked him. Ross, standing behind, didn't know what to think. They are brother and sister. There could not be such a special connection between them, but in fact, they did not have the same blood. In fact, they are strangers. The Lord was lucky that his master had already returned. He was glad that it turned out this way, as was Romija herself, and the brunette decided to ask her why she believed in him. The reason could simply be the phenomenon itself. Yus always tries hard, he is persistent and will never give up. He does not show that he is having a hard time, but all people have special problems. A young man can really do a lot, but he shouldn't overwork himself. The work can be shared with a loved one, for example, a lady. The man raised an eyebrow, not understanding why the lady was telling him all this, since she was the one who overworked and fell, and she should be the one who allowed herself to be helped. The heroine still didn't know what to do. She wanted to rest, but also complete her assignments. She was offered to rest for 1 day and then return to her assignments. The young man picked up the lady in his arms to carry her back to the room. At first she was silent, but then she said that they were saying that the daughter of Count Illuminatus had fallen ill, and even the doctors didn't know what it was. In the original, the Count says that he needs medicine and betrays the Duke's family. They could have learned about this remedy through the Golden Rose. They would have helped. When the lady remained in the room, she again returned to her thoughts. She decided to rest a little, just for 1 day. They threw a bag of money and all the interest on the table to Uncle. He didn't believe what was happening and asked if Yus had sold his stepmother's jewelry. The answer was no. Blue-Eyed asked for the IOU back. The man was angry, because at this rate the plans to undermine the Duke's family could collapse. He took 1 coin out of the bag to check if it was genuine barat. Obviously it wasn't even a hoax. I had to ask where my niece was. She was busy with things. Obviously she didn't like the answer about being busy. The man was going to go see her in person. Yustaf remained calm as he continued to speak. If the hero wished to have an audience, he should arrange a time in advance and set up a meeting. The uncle continued to shout, declaring his high status. The boy's sister, the head of the Latium house. Even in the family there are those who are higher and lower in status, and this is normal. The brunette had to swallow his anger. He handed over the receipt and asked to tell the owner of the estate that they needed to meet. Of course, not everything was so simple. The man did not want to move from the spot until a time was set for the meeting, which would take place. When Yus closed the door, he immediately met Ross. His relative's behavior was unexpected, but still, he would have to tell the head about everything. She was probably waiting. The knight asked if it was true that they were wearing clothes about Ding trusting Ran. She was only temporarily the head of the house, but everyone in the house showed her the respect they should have. If Yus had graduated and returned after 6 months, he would not have had the opportunity to squeeze back in. But the man still said what he wanted. The woman didn't understand what they wanted from her again. She specifically wanted her brother to go to the meeting. She didn't want any problems. The blonde nevertheless went down to the hall. She apologized for her lateness. He immediately jumped up and noticed that Yusuf had returned earlier than expected. It turned out that the heroine herself also did not know that the man would graduate early. Even if she was surprised, it was still considered for the best. The lady was advised to be careful, to keep a close eye on things, because there were already attempts on the head's place, and it was not worth giving it to the young man because he did not deserve it. The woman felt uncomfortable. The old man's thoughts were incomprehensible to her. In any case, her place would go to her brother in 2 years, but the uncle declared that by that time his niece would not be safe. The hero has already started to take care of his master's affairs, which is generally logical. The girl recently fainted, which means someone staged it. Mother Ran also asked for medicine for her headaches, but for some reason she never got better until her death. The doctor who prescribed treatment for the lady was brought into the family by the Duke's ex-wife. If you think about it, 90% of the events weren't described in the original. They were woven into life themselves. Still, the beauty will have to choose whose side she will remain on herself. Her uncle left and she fell onto the bed without strength. It is difficult to resist such an old man. There was a knock on the door and Yusuf immediately entered, bringing with him some iced tea. In Latium, where there is an ice wall, it won't be difficult to find ice even in summer. The girl drank it all almost immediately. A joke was heard about how there might be poison in it. The heroine immediately asked again in fear and relaxed when she was promised that everything was fine. Of course, the lady's behavior could have been strange, but in the end, she herself was afraid that she would be killed, and she had to believe in the truth of her words. Surely, the girl began to think that since they had become a little friends, they would definitely not kill her. Her thoughts had every right to exist. On the other hand, the hero would not be surprised if, on the contrary, the woman constantly suspected her brother and was cautious with all her actions. The blonde thought for a moment and answered, "She really thinks that as soon as Yus becomes the leader, he will want to kill the lady, so she is trying with all her might to become his best friend." Even if in the end nothing could be changed, the lady tried to reassure herself that she could do nothing. A cold atmosphere hung in the room. Having stood up, Lazia asked another question. He wanted to know sincerely why the lady thought about it in such a way. Virgo cannot believe that nothing can be done about her fate. She must at least have sympathy, remorse, or despair inside her. Whatever Lasha felt, her brother would not like it anyway, and he was going to make his intentions fully clear. Stepping back, the heroine tried to understand whether they hated her. Releasing the lady's throat, the man walked away and said with disappointment that he didn't understand. There was silence in the room until the girl, smiling slightly, decided to reveal her feelings. In fact, she felt a little remorse. Until then, Latium had been a nuisance to the Duke for half his life, and if he had wanted to kill her, he would have found sufficient reasons to take this step. If the brunette can get away with it without killing, the lady will be happy. After transferring her status, she will pack her things and immediately leave the estate. The topic of the uncle came up. It seems he is well informed about the internal affairs of the family. Usually the state of the head of the house would remain classified, but the hero knew about everything, which means there are his people in the house. There are puppets in the house, most likely not even 1 or 2 of them. The blonde realized this, so she said that it would be better to eliminate these people. The stranger's goal is blackmail, which means they need to be sought through provocation. The man hopes that they will reveal themselves and everything will be calm. The uncle was very angry. He was the second son and received the title of Baron from his father. Masurus was also the one who passed on the Latium family name, but in the end, the head became the daughter of a girl who was not even related to the Duke. The gentleman's family was large, and in high society, the young man's name could attract a huge number of glances. Of course, he had a beautiful, high, ivory-colored estate. Traditions, reputation, and money could have belonged to Moss. The legend of the blue flame also turned out to be true. The girl was lucky, and she summoned that spirit. The master will have to hurry before the chances disappear completely. Robbie was summoned to his father. He was simply going to carry out his plan a little earlier. Ran is a good girl, and then the young man will become the next Duke of Latium. It was summer outside, but for some reason the girl felt cold again. Latium remains a cold country in any case, even if the temperature in other countries is high. In fact, in winter you could freeze to death if you didn't handle what you had to do correctly. The girl didn't quite understand why they didn't create items like a regular fan with the help of magic. The heroine stated that they needed a craftsman. She wanted to supply the lands with items created at a low price. The brunette asked what would happen if resellers appeared. It will be necessary to hire someone to regulate everything. Yus didn't seem skeptical given the whole situation. Next week, the first shipment of goods to the Golden Rose will be completed. There are a lot of stones, so everything will be great. The magicians were alarmed by their desire to enter the territory of Latium. The maiden laughed. It was not for nothing that there was a ban on their entry. After Robori showed the crystals, the Mage Association became alarmed. They weren't interested in fame and money, so it took more effort to earn their trust. With the help of even more stones, it will still not be difficult to establish connections related to magic. The sending will be completed very soon, but everything will be revealed only in December. It is winter that marks the beginning of the social season, and it is a bit inconvenient that minors are not allowed there, but this can be survivable. Usually the aristocracy gathers together, but only if they have no special business. The season begins in December and lasts until August, during which time balls are held very frequently and everything is filled with noise and carriages. To be eligible to participate, you must be over 19 years of age and have completed a coming-of-age ceremony. There's no better advertising platform than social events, so Ron decided to showcase not only stones, but also previously unseen items created with mana. Of all the places, the most suitable place is the largest ball held in the Imperial Palace of the Golden Swan. The palace could become the first buyer. Romia had one more major task. Before the social season began, she had to head to the capital to find the second main character. Even in the novel, in order to find Rumie, I had to beat around the bush at first. Yus distracted me from my thoughts and suggested I take a rest. In the evening, the lady finally sank into the bath to wash away the traces of a hard day. After all, it was much easier with two people, and the work was finished faster. The girl was given some medicine. She drank it again, because she wanted to get well soon. But instead of feeling light, she felt weak. She didn't immediately understand what had happened and tried to reach the bed, but fell right in the middle of the room, because her knees buckled on their own. The maiden understood that everything was strange, but all she could do was call out to Istalif, and it seemed his voice finally reached the man, and he appeared. At first, the heroine did not believe what she saw. But then she realized everything. The blue flame was the one she had previously summoned with the ring. No one in the Latium family knew the spirit's real name, but somehow the lady found out about it on her own. The woman didn't understand where she was. Everything was white, as if covered in fog. She remembered how she drank the medicine. Perhaps Yustaf was the one who attempted to kill the heroine. Istalif lengthened his neck and lowered his head right to the girl's face. She was so deep in thought that she needed to be distracted. I had to ask if the heroine had died, and when she received a negative answer, she became even more lost. Her body had only fallen asleep, and they were in the world of the subconscious. The girl connects with the place in the subconscious only when she plunges into the deepest sleep. Istalif again asked how the lady knew his name. The woman turned away. She definitely couldn't say that she was the creator of the world. That wasn't her style. Another spirit appeared. It seemed like they were all half animal and half human. It was hard to cope with even watching. She didn't remember describing something like this. The stranger assured Rand that they would not harm him. The one who entered the body had already died, but now the new person knew the name of the spirit, which had been kept secret. Istalif asked the black spear to step aside and not interfere, which angered him quite a bit, and now the lady realized that in front of her was someone from another ducal family, the Roses Uzzle. Virgo knows the man's name, but isn't sure if she should say it, so she decides to blackmail him and asks him to help her get out in exchange for the truth. The woman also wanted to wake up not in 100 years and make sure that she did not miss anything, because that would be strange for her. Finally, the girl revealed that she was the author of the novella she had written, and that she actually came from the Republic of Korea. The Black Spear said the strange name Phanius. It seemed to mean that the girl was reading. The two turned away and began to discuss something only among themselves. The blonde asked to stop discussing behind her back and to say everything to her face. Probably what was happening was connected with her moving back. Another spirit appeared in the distance. It was a leopard. The man noticed that this time they had a rather unfamiliar and new guest. The lady was attacked by an oppressive feeling. Romia stepped back and greeted them almost immediately. The fog began to dissipate, going in different directions. When clouds became visible around, a table and chair appeared in the middle where Ran was invited. She was skeptical, but agreed in order to get answers. In the spirit world, a perfect class system has been established, a hierarchy that has been defined since its very creation, which cannot be changed under any circumstances, exists. There is a pyramid system according to status. The spirit sitting next to the lady turned out to be of the highest rank. He is one of the main ones. The Virgin told what and how much had been written about the world of the novel. It turned out that she had only read the created world. People call the one who reads the seer. A revolution occurred in her head. The blonde became scared, because this also meant that Yustaf might not be the main character, but something else. Each reader had different ways of reading. The content and time of reading, the record of the world becomes a prophecy. Still not understanding anything, the green-eyed girl explained that she was sure that she was writing thoughts from her head. The spirit tried to explain more. He was asked how the girl ended up in the heroine's body. The leopard shook his head. He was also not sure. The character's name was originally written to be the same as the author's, but when they both died, something unexpected happened. The thing is that the girl was not aware of all the details, and there was a door next to her when it was decided that she would be transported to another world. Now the blue flame has received satisfaction of its feelings. It is not every day that one gets to meet a reader. They are truly rare creatures. Everything around her started spinning. She went back. Because their agreement was in force, she had to return to reality immediately after the story. The woman almost fell out of bed, and yet she was unlucky. At first, the lady did not understand where she was and jumped up to look around. Running to the mirror, she breathed a sigh of relief. Thank God, Ran was still visible in the reflection. She just didn't understand why she wasn't in her room. Only after a few moments did the blonde realize that she was in the room of the Duke's wife. She had to find a way out. In fact, the happiness was at least that the heroine remained alive. A maid came into the room to ask how her mistress was feeling. The heroine found out what had happened, and first it was decided to inform Mr. Yustafa. He should talk to his sister. The young man sat and waited because he definitely had something to say. It seemed that something had happened during the lady's absence, but she certainly didn't know. Over time, the blonde began to understand that what was happening was not a dream, but reality. It seems that up until that moment, she felt like she was in an affair and not living a full life. Now she could rejoice, because she was no longer an author who mocked her characters. She had a different mission. It's not even a work written by Ran, but she did a good deed by telling about the mines. She was able to protect Yustafa. The green-eyed girl now considered herself a good person. She turned to the maid, having learned her name. Soda came to help. And before that, Miss Kara, who was higher in status, came. If you think about it, the woman was hungry. She decided to go to a meeting and therefore went down to the hall. After examining the table, the lady sat down on a chair. The brunette, as it turned out, was very worried about her. The wrong one had slipped her poison or sleeping pills, because he wouldn't have been so stupid. The sister calmly began to eat, which was strange. She was not afraid that there would be an attempt on her life again, because the guy needed her at least until the ceremony. At first, the gentleman did not want to tell what happened while the lady was sleeping. It turned out that Robbie had bribed the maid and asked her not to tell anyone anything. When the girl ran away literally around the first turn, she met Yus and Ross. She should have been nearby. Then she would have had a chance to survive. When the man had already started to reach out to Ran, a brunette appeared behind him and put a sword to his throat. Yustafa was disgusted to see this man. When Robbie realized who was standing next to him, he immediately began to stutter and said that there had been an unfortunate misunderstanding. Blue-Eyed remained skeptical, which was generally logical. The girl was put to sleep, and they tried to take her clothes off. All this is not just like that. The young man thought about pulling his sword, but he knew that then everything around would be splattered with blood. Everything in Latium still belonged to the master. He was able to protect his own, despite all the efforts of his stepmother. Robbie and his father tried to use Ran to take over the leadership, and the conversation only continued when his brother was pinned to the floor. Blondie, upon hearing the story, was initially unable to utter a word. Everything that happened was initially organized by her uncle. It is quite logical that the man is simply such a person. Nothing will stop him. If Yus were the head, he would send him his daughter. Without wanting to, the young man moved the girl's room to another place. She accepted this because she understood that in any case there was no choice. The interrogation lasted for 3 days, and a lot of information was obtained from Robbie's accomplices, who gladly agreed to cooperate. Baron Lindbog has already been arrested. He only repeated that it was completely unfair, but he didn't say anything more. He simply lacks imagination. It might have been easier to end things on time, since the man was arrested, and it would be more difficult to restore future relationships. Blondie quickly came up with a good solution to the problem: confiscate the Baron's property and exile him to distant lands. The green-eyed girl gradually began to realize that the person sitting in front of her was not the hero she had been portrayed as, but a full-fledged person. The girl turned to him to clarify something. Surely the character knew that his uncle would do something, the man exhaled. He thought that the lady was too fast. Figuratively speaking, the Duchess was so fast that all who chased her were unable to catch up with her and get what they wanted. What was more important for the woman was that, knowing about the plans in advance, he did not tell her anything, pretending that there was no problem with it. Blue Eyes found an explanation even for these actions. The Baron also began to act faster than he expected. It was necessary to lead him into a dead end. The brunette deliberately did not prevent everything from happening, and he did not even hide it. Catching someone at the crime scene, as a rule, was always the easiest. The blonde understood, but it was scary to think what would have happened if her brother had been late even for a moment. Being used as bait was not on the list of plans. However, it was the lady who could not foresee her uncle's steps. She thanked him for saving her. Without help, everything would have only been worse. The young man couldn't tell everything in advance. At that moment, a strange fear lurked inside him. He was afraid that if the girl found out about the whole plan, the enemy would act differently from what he had assumed. The heroine herself entrusted the security to Yusu. However, he was given control over all matters related to the protection of the palace and its mistress. The conversation turned to something else. It was strange to mention it in the current situation, but the lady reminded him how she had asked him not to kill her. At that time, the woman mentioned that if her brother wished it, she would die, but now she takes her words back. She did not intend to end her life so soon. There is no longer a sense of obligation to the beauty, so she will live more diligently. Yus agreed this is great news for him, because he did not want to die. The brunette responded by asking about the intentions of making him the leader and whether the plan had changed. The green-eyed girl immediately jumped up. The task was in development. The plan was not supposed to change even a little bit. In 2 years, the man would turn 18, and then he would take over as head of the family. The girl did not want to continue doing all the difficult work. It turned out that Rand never thought about what would happen to her after the contract was broken. They could have created another alliance. Different conditions would have suited everyone. The fact that the girl continued to eat while sitting at the table, even after she was almost poisoned, was stupidity, but for Yus it seemed like courage. She would be the only person capable of betraying him. Subconsciously, no one would want to be deceived. It is difficult for a person to trust, but it seems that their union only provided for this option. The blue-eyed man finally gave his consent. The blonde was immediately happy and instantly beamed. She wanted to move on to discussing the details. She just needed the money. Any amount can be spent from the duchy's balance, and although at the time of the conversation it was in the negative, the permission was not removed when money appeared. Rand stopped her brother and his reasoning. She doesn't care what the head will spend. She needs personal money for her as Rand. Even such conditions were agreed to. But the question remained. After Yustafa became the master, in order to remain the daughter of the Latian family, the girl would most likely have to get married. In the strange situations that might arise in a novel, the heroine must become involved with the second protagonist, but he is not her type. Yus asked to meet in the evening to discuss all the details again, and then left. Rand still didn't understand whether he liked her or hated her, yet their relationship was more friendly. The whole situation turned out to be more complicated than expected. Uncle Robbie's plan was to do something terrible and then say he did it out of love. Letting the guilty ones go would not have been the best decision. Yus had originally intended to send them to death, but it was better to settle for exile. The gentleman did not want to do anything wrong. He simply insisted on his option, and the Baron's son would also be prohibited from visiting his father's heavenly estate. The territory of Latium is huge, so there was a separate court there. In any case, the most important thing was that the problem with the uncle was resolved. It was necessary to pay off the debts to everyone else as quickly as possible. This way it would be easier for Yustafa to live in the future. He would know that everything is in order. The young man's future was supposed to be bright, and he was supposed to be happy next to the main character, Sheena, about whom, of course, he knew nothing yet. The girl started talking about the jewelry. The first thing she wanted to do was return the money they had borrowed from the officials because she was ashamed to look them in the eyes. The amount of the first necessity alone was 50,000 barat. The rest was 200 or 300,000. It seemed that every year Latium would do nothing but pay interest. Believing the original story, the uncle became the regent of Latium. He sold off lands as if trying to get rid of them. In the end, he himself, along with his servants, died due to some kind of infection, and it was in this terrible state that Yus took over the family. Until then, the lady had only thought that it went without saying that the man had his difficulties, but apparently the duchy really meant a lot to the man. The heroine snorted. If it weren't for Yustafa's honor, she would have long ago taken all the jewelry and fled the estate. The spirits revealed that the world of the novel was not actually written by Ran, but she still developed a special attachment to each character. When Ross placed 2 cups of tea on the table, deliberately spilling the headman's drink, Yus behaved like a gentleman, holding out his portion so that his sister wouldn't get her hands dirty. It turned out that the young man's actions were better than his words. The man asked again about those decorations and whether the lady would be against selling some of the jewelry. It would not be possible to get much money from reselling them, so the heroine was planning to sell only a few pieces that were in better condition. The lady will leave the remaining jewelry for the Duke's future wife. Then, when Sheena appears, it will be necessary to give her everything she needs. Time flew by. The man sent by Rabati assessed several jewelry sets and paid a generous sum. First, the debt was paid to Wild and Lance. The barons said that the money did not have to be returned. But they still seemed satisfied. They had borrowed large sums, which was difficult for their families. Very soon, rumors began to circulate among the servants. They learned that, as head, the woman had sold all of her mother's jewelry. The blonde knew that gossip would spread, but she still hoped until the end that they would talk about how after the sale, the money was put aside for the family. Yustaf said that what happened was for the best. The girl didn't understand at first, but then she was happy because this way they would be able to select people. When it is revealed that there are mana stones, of course, everything will be simpler. But while there was still time, the heroine was going to find out who works for money and who does not. It was hard to find anyone you could truly trust, but after a while, a low-born master wizard named Lydia and a boy named Francis arrived. The maid almost immediately asked the maids to escort the two through the rooms. From the moment they entered the house, everything had to be kept secret. Very soon, one of those very same mana stones was shown. 20 years have passed since anyone saw something like this. They are extremely rare. The blonde smiled. She had hoped that with their help they would conduct research and invent. For Latzia, the stone was not that valuable, because they had a lot of them. The aim of the duchy was to make such stones publicly available, regardless of whether a person had money or not. Mages are forbidden from approaching Latium within a 10-kilometer radius. Masters are exempt from the rules, but they are reluctant to come. They were foolish to refuse and decide to send Lydia and Francis. They will help each other. They will become the official masters of the family. The woman bowed in respect and promised that she would do everything to show a good result. The Duchess nodded. First of all, it was necessary to make a magical device that would make the blanket warm. September in Latium always forced people to dress warmly. Full-blown winter was already expected to arrive in November, and residents had to freeze until April. Yus knocked on the door of the room where the lady was sitting and entered. The girl didn't even ask who was there, because she already knew who was behind the door. It turned out that Ran had a visitor, and it was her brother who had informed her of his arrival, because the man was truly special. Before this, they called a doctor, and a healer entered the room after Yustaf, who turned out to be an elf, just like in the novel. The man almost immediately took something out of his pocket. It was a scarlet magic stone sent through the golden rose. The maiden confirmed that she had sent a gift. The elf asked where the woman had found the stone. She wanted to talk on equal terms, as she was determined to make a deal at all costs, but it seemed that this would not work. The man introduced himself as Haresh. Ran also answered and once again found hope that not all was completely lost. Yes took the stone. The girl was nervous. She had not yet had time to tell him about the new find. The blonde did not think that the elf would appear so suddenly. Transparent magical diamonds can be used personally. In Latium, there are scarlet and azure stones that can only be used by elves and dwarves. The magical power of human mages begins to change even if they simply come close to such things, which is why they stay away from Latium. Haresh was about to sit down at the table, but refused tea, saying that people had disgusting tea. Yustaf also realized what kind of character the man had. Very bad. The elf, as is typical of his race, spoke without thinking about the feelings of others. He had no intention of being a kind and gentle merchant, yet it would be easier for Latium to do business in that case. The elf noticed that throughout the conversation, the girl was trying to find out more information. He said that they had a limit on the creation of medicinal herbs. Of course, the heroine knew about this detail. She said that by adding an ointment created from the universal water, they would become 10 times more effective. You can produce 10 pieces a year, but there is nowhere to use them, so the jars are stored. You can exchange the medicines for stones, considering that it will be more useful anyway. Of course, Latium plans to accept various items created by the elves. No one can outdo their race in woodworking. The girl, it turned out, was going to cooperate with the dwarves. Haresh immediately grimaced. They wouldn't work for the same stones as the elves. It is already known that there is a certain difference. Both clans have a need to trade, and with the help of Latium this will become possible. However, after thinking for a bit, the young man promised that he would discuss everything with the elders and then return back. Initially, the lady wanted another man to cure the Illuminati's daughter. It was already evening outside. They could visit her in the morning. The maiden wanted to show her a place to spend the night, but the elf was getting ready to leave. He felt stuffy in the people's house, so he promised to return at dawn. As soon as the window closed, Yusa's dissatisfied cough was heard. He wanted to listen to an explanation. The woman tried to justify herself, but she found it difficult. As soon as the lady opened her mouth, the Duke announced that Robbie had recently died. He had gotten involved in another gambling game, but already in exile, and there he was killed. This is a disgrace for the whole family. So the blue-eyed man visited his uncle, but he simply remained silent. The man did not say exactly when the meeting took place. He simply did not want to. Finally, the maiden explained everything. The blue-eyed man decided not to ask for now how she knew all this, but he could tell how he himself could use the stones. The young man held out one of the diamonds. If he had the opportunity, he would have certainly attacked the magicians. At the very least, he could have threatened them with the stones. In fact, it was the magicians who changed the conditions of the war. The woman was actually thinking about this option, although she came from Korea. There was a temporary truce there, but still. Ran initially wanted to keep the existence of the stones a secret, and then send a man to the Mage Association and tell them about their danger. The young man suggested acting accordingly with the option. Ran thought about everything and actually realized that the plan was not so bad. It was brilliant. The brunette quietly asked who Ran really was. The girl began to worry, as if someone had seen right through her. She was very bad at lying. Even her brother noticed it. To begin with, it was decided to send a letter to the Count. The young man was getting ready to leave. Before going out the door, he asked if his sister would be able to contract. At first, the lady did not immediately understand everything, but then she realized that she had said this before. It was not the best decision, but she did not think about it then. Falling face down on the sofa, the girl sighed in disappointment. It was still better to prepare an escape plan so that no other problems would arise. The Count's mansion was quite far away, and Haresh said that he found it stuffy to ride in the carriage and decided to ride sitting next to the coachman in the fresh air. Yustaf remained at the estate, so the heroine left with a calm soul. She could finally feel freedom again, after so many long months. When they arrived at the place, the woman barely got out of the carriage. Her back was stiff. She immediately began to think about the next magical invention for convenience. The Illuminate greeted the guests at the door. Instead of greeting them, the elf immediately asked where the patient was and where he should go. Rand tried to justify herself. After all, she couldn't lose a good relationship. The man nodded. It didn't bother him. He just needed help. When the brunette entered the room, the patient immediately grimaced and ordered that the room be aired out. Cold air was not the best idea, but the stuffiness was even worse. As soon as Haresh was at the girl's bedside, he ordered her to extend her hand to him, examined her, asked if she continued to take her medication, and then delivered his verdict. The disease was called Schwimrichhicka. The medicines, it seems, began to be given after the lady became weak. Then everything began, because they became poison for her. Substances continued to accumulate in the body. People often use strong drugs unnecessarily, but now simply stopping taking the prescribed medication will not change anything. The volume will simply have to be reduced gradually. And then within 6 months, there's every chance of being healthy again. A joyful atmosphere hung in the air. Rand promised to pay, and although the Illuminate wanted to offer payment himself, he was refused. He and the lady had their own deal, not for gold. Haresh also decided to write out a small prescription. The maiden expected that, of course, it would be written in Elvish, but he wrote it in normal language and in beautiful handwriting. Blue-Eyed promised that he would come to the lady much later. It would be easier that way. He again escaped through the window, just to avoid being near people. The Count invited the girl into the guest room for a short talk, and the little girl's older brother came there with her. He was incredibly happy, as was his whole family. He promised that as soon as the girl felt a little better, they would definitely repay her kindness with full generosity. The heroine was offered a little drink. She just smiled and answered negatively. She would drink a congratulatory glass when Lulu recovered. The Illuminate asked the Duchess directly what she wanted. He did not understand what she expected from friendship. Sitting down, she stated that in the future she would use their connections. The Count is connected to the underworld. What has an open side also has a reverse side. The man nodded. He even wanted to admire the possibilities of the duchy. Of course, it wasn't entirely clear what was going on, but the red-haired man wanted to know where and for what purposes his connections would be used, and Ran wanted to make her search easier. The hero thought and promised that if he was ordered, he would try to use his powers to find the person the lady needed. She breathed a sigh of relief. Soon after agreeing to keep the whole conversation a secret, the heroine left. In fact, Ran shouldn't have been so worried about everything since this wasn't even her world, but she couldn't stop. Rumie is due to be involved in illegal fights in just a year. He needs to be saved from this horror. The girl promised herself to do everything possible. At times, the heroine regretted that she had not described the details in more detail. Her heart was heavy only because the beauty did not know the full story. In the end, Ran was about to return. The owner was informed that the elf had unfortunately been lost, but the girl would be fine. The young man didn't quite understand why he was so worried about the girl. His concern would have been obvious if she had been an ordinary aristocrat, but in her case, everything was very unbalanced. There were still a lot of questions in Titus's head. He didn't understand how Ran had managed to find out about the Count's daughter being sick, or about the magical stones. After all, she had been chosen by the Blue Flame. Before this, the stone had never chosen anyone who was not of the Duke's blood. The man turned to his assistant and asked to find out in detail what the Count would do after the heroine's departure. Blue-Eyed talked with the green shadow of the House of Latzia, although at the moment, the head is the lady. The first green shadow came to Yustaf. The boy had learned about this guild from his late mother even earlier. In any case, Romeo was the temporary head, and she didn't need to be privy to all the affairs. A secret organization can't be maintained by loyalty alone. There are incredible financial investments behind it. The man spent huge sums as team money, and the girl didn't ask anything about it, so everything is fine. While Yus was thinking, he himself did not notice how the young lady returned home. The servant reported this. The blonde asked from the doorway why the man still had not had dinner. At the table, Romeo explained what had happened and how the Count's daughter would be treated. The elf turned out to be a very unpleasant person, like Aluminum himself, so it was useful to gain his favor. The green-eyed girl had worked hard all day. The brunette handed her another plate of food. Judging by how quickly she ate it all, she needed more to gain strength. There was a sudden noise. The window fell open and an elf entered. To the gentleman's indignation, he said that he was too lazy to use the door. Approaching the Duchess, the man extended his hand and demanded payment. It had already been an hour, and in a few moments the girl returned with a small chest containing a diamond. The young man wanted to say goodbye, but she said that there was still hope that they would see each other for some good reason. As soon as there was silence again, the gentleman nodded, hoping that with this he would be able to engage in foreign trade, and he would also have to come to an agreement with the dwarves. Tomorrow Laisha was going to meet with the head of the Association of Magicians. The hero knew that it was impossible to meet them near the ice wall, so it would be more difficult. Wizards are incredibly proud. They are not going to help contact the palaces just like that. They do not even thank anyone just like that, without a reason. The next morning, Max showed up at the door saying he wanted to come back with an answer, but the association said they really hoped to meet the lady. This time, the lady was not going to go alone. Her brother promised that they would go together. She did not even try to refuse, realizing that it would be better for everyone. When the two were alone, the young man removed the ring with the blue flame from his pendant and carefully placed it on the surprised woman. When the blonde decided to ask the first question, Lacia stated that no one knew how the dwarves would behave. They could be aggressive and needed protection. The protagonist made Ran tremble. The contract they were going to make with the mages was very important, and most of them were quite old, which is why they could simply reject any proposal from a young girl like Romeo. Despite everything, the woman felt that she was cuter than ever. She had found something strange as soon as she got the ring back on her finger. The maid helped the Duchess dress in a beautiful outfit. Appearance was also important. The woman understood this, and there was no need to give anyone any reason to underestimate her. In the corridor, the lady met her brother. He looked normal and said that that day he was only going to be a knight. Then he was asked if the blonde was overdressed. The main character openly complimented her. He simply thought that his sister couldn't be so beautiful usually. Saying warm words, he didn't have any hidden motives. As they rode in the carriage, the girl kept going over everything in her head. The future. She said that she wanted a secret meeting, but they chose such a forest wilderness that it was not easy to get there. Very soon, the delegation stopped in one of the clearings. A man in a hood appeared there. He quietly asked, clarifying whether it was really a lady from Latium in front of him. The meeting was supposed to take place very close. The magician asked to follow him. They used magic so that ordinary people could not see this place. Some of his own people came out, wanting to go with the leader, but the stranger objected. The girl still couldn't be left alone, so she proposed the defender Mustafa as a candidate. For about 10 minutes, everyone followed the forest path. The heroine's eyes widened when a luxurious place appeared ahead that she had never seen before. The girl walked inside and immediately said hello. The game was just about to begin, but she was already ready to put everything into it. After some time, the leader realized that the girl, who had only recently become the leader, was not as simple as expected, and that the knight standing behind her was getting on his nerves even more. The young man seemed to be directly involved in this conversation. It was unclear how it was possible for the guard to make his presence known so strongly. The beauty calmly explained that she was not asking for anything impossible, as long as the Association of Magicians did not intend to become an enemy of her, that is, of her duchy. Nevertheless, the gentleman agreed. In exchange, they would keep silent about the fact that there were colored ice crystals in Latium, and they also wanted to obtain a small amount of them for experiments. Once everything was decided, the girls stood up. They did not want to leave the estate unattended for long, so, of course, they got ready to leave. On the street, the magician asked who his mistress was. She smiled and said that it was her younger brother. He immediately realized that it was good that they came to an agreement, because the next chapter was in front of him. They said goodbye. The girl was glad to meet Mr. Regent. Near the carriage, the knights immediately rushed to Ran. She said that everything went well only because Yustaf was next to her. All the affairs were completed safely. Still, a strange aftertaste remained. Romeo was sure that during the negotiations they would start threatening her, using magic, or at least raising their voice. Although some of them seemed emotional from time to time but quickly collected their thoughts again, it still seems that the magicians are very balanced people, or perhaps they were frightened by the knight's energy. Blue-Eyed was skeptical. The girl assumed that something would go wrong and still wanted to go, leaving all the knights behind. She objected. Without sitting down at the negotiating table, she would not even be able to start them. Of course, the blonde could have insisted on taking them with her, but she had no desire to start with a bad mood, and she needed good allies. Yus was a good choice as a knight. The young man smiled casually. He justified it by saying he'd been making fun of her a lot lately. He adjusted the lady's clothes on her shoulders. As they climbed the mountain, the temperature would continue to drop. A few days later, there was snow in Latium. Winter in the duchy is brutal, but despite its incredible cold, it is very warm there thanks to a magical item created using an ice crystal. In high society, the best advertising is a personal presentation of a product rather than empty words. The girl wanted their product to be a hit. Once outside, the lady found her clothes too heavy. The knight decided to help her onto her horse, and she thanked him. Even if the lady falls off the horse, it won't hurt, because the clothes are too thick. Finally, the time has come to climb into the door. She has been waiting for this for a very long time. There was a great sorceress, Ibria, and if you think about it, she really was incredible because with the help of magic, she froze an entire proud ridge. Romeo once read about this. There's even a painting in the estate of this girl freezing the mountains. And a door. And behind that door is something even more important. When they finally arrived at the place, the lady could barely get off her horse. Her knees were shaking, but she assured them that everything was fine and she could continue walking. There were no cracks or patterns on the door except for the symbol of Latium itself. The man took off his necklace and ring and handed it over to his sister. The woman put on jewelry. These simple actions are New Year's customs that the family is obliged to carry out annually. This ceremony is important. Only the head of the family can do this, and although Ran was currently carrying out the task herself, eventually the responsibility would fall on her brother's shoulders. It seems that everything went quite well this year. Every year, I have to perform a ritual that doesn't even take much time. There's still one big task left. I'll have to get on the horse again and go down. When they went out, Yustaf offered to go with him. The girl sat behind and suddenly noticed that he seemed to have grown even taller, which was strange. The heroine lightly touched his hair and said that this was just the appearance of sisterly love. The horse suddenly neighed, and they almost fell after it was all over. The man laughed. The hero still decided to ask. It was like love. The green-eyed girl said that she knew little about Yustaf's mother. She asked what kind of person his mother was, hoping that it was not too rude. The woman was very proud, in both a good and bad sense. Because of her illness, she didn't like the weather in Latium. Her sister agreed. Her mother also particularly hated winter. There was no one who liked the weather in the northern regions. In reality, everything was much more complicated. The news that while the Duchess was dying, her husband proposed to another completely ruined her. The blonde froze. It turns out that the Duke was a bad man. Although the girl tried to raise her son with love, in the end, she was chosen. The brunette completely forgot about it. For some reason, he feels as if every now and then he reveals his whole soul too easily. When they arrived, the girl asked them to quickly round up the horses and change their clothes, because the New Year's party was about to begin soon, for the knights too. It turned out that the head of the family distributed all the principal amounts and interest on the debts according to their origins and dates. The creditors were very interested in where such money came from. It seemed that some of them even wanted to cooperate with the duchy, but the woman refused. Next year they were planning to throw a huge party, but now everything was already fine. Romija was sitting at the table and drinking, but Yustaf came up and gave her a glass of water to sober up a little. As soon as it became clearer what was happening, the blonde noticed that he was in the academy uniform. Of course, the girl does not have a fortune, but she could buy her brother one suit. He looked closely, noticing that the dress was a little short. This dress belonged to her mother, and she was shorter than her. The Duchess was an elegant lady. She always bought suitable jewelry, dresses, and shoes for the new year, thus dressing herself from head to toe. She said that this was a kind of payment for the fact that she lived too far away and could not attend the New Year's celebration at the imperial palace. Compared to the wives of other families, the lady was always ahead of fashion. Although because of this the duchy went bankrupt, everything changed with the sale of stones. A young man distracted her from her thoughts. He invited Rand to dance. The woman said that she was a bad dancer, but she was assured that they would help her with everything. And as soon as the music started, the couple began to dance. Everything was fine, until the moment the lady accidentally stepped on her partner's shoe. Blue-Eyed swallowed his hurt and pain and said that he agreed that the lady really couldn't dance. He just didn't want Lazia to lose face, which was logical. The sister knew that their family was a very ancient one with its own traditions and glory, but she could not say that this was something incredibly important to her. Besides, it was cold there, and everything was not entirely well. Everything on the property belongs only to Yustaf. His mother has been telling the young man since childhood that he needs to be calmer and find a compromise without expressing emotions. Sister should have practiced dancing before leaving for the capital. When the music ended, another began, and the lady was invited to a new dance, although they saw how bad she was. The knight laughed after a while, noting that his skills really needed to be improved. The conversation turned to Ross. He was too unceremonious, but there was no point in thinking about that. The man had served only his master since childhood. Perhaps he treated him like an older brother. The lady was not worried about this. She also liked Yustaf very much. In fact, the future head will remain quite loyal. He rather doesn't like his sister's actions. It's immediately clear that it's not very good when feelings have to be shown. After the dance, the lady went to eat. As expected, half of the snacks were already gone, so she had to take something else, something that the girl also really liked. The green-eyed girl found herself on the balcony. The air was cool. Maybe because there was too much alcohol in her blood? Everything was swimming before her eyes. Snow was falling on all sides. The girl let her hair down and sat on the railing. Yustaf's voice was heard, and turning around, the heroine began to scream, calling him to her. She almost fell down, but was caught at the last moment. The brunette breathed a sigh of relief. It hadn't ended so badly, but the lady should have been more careful and not behaved so irresponsibly. The green-eyed girl asked to smile. She was not going to die so easily. The girl showed all the signs that she should have stopped at the first drinks. When another reproach was heard, the woman grimaced with displeasure. It was all her brother's fault, because he continued to be stubborn. For him, what was happening was strange. The blonde bowed her head to Latium and kissed him on the top of his head. She continued to try to make their duchy better, but for some reason no one appreciated her efforts. The girl would like to be treated kindly, and even affectionately. But in fact, she had long desired something more, so as not to fear for her future in life. When the blonde was asked if she loved Latium, she said that it was all very relative. After all, she doesn't work so hard to show her love. In part, everything is done for Yustaf. In fact, the lady needs it too, because she has no other refuge except the duchy. She simply has no choice. The hero commented that the woman was heartless, but she continued to ask to be treated right. Suddenly, a strong wind blew. Ran almost fell again, but she was caught by the hand. Blue-Eyed didn't dump his sister, because he made her a promise. It's not worth saying such things, since the girl knows deep down in her soul what will happen to her. That's right. Yes picked up the woman in his arms. The blonde was very cold. Her lips were blue, so it was decided to go back to the estate, inside, to warm up. At the entrance to the mistress's chambers, they were met by a maid. She immediately noticed the Duchess's condition and offered to prepare a warm bath. At this time, Yustaf went to another training session as the master requested. Ross appointed a capable person as a guard so that Ran would not have any further problems. The sister believed in promises, although in reality it was strange. Her life depended on one single moment, but in reality everything was more complicated than just a moment. The next morning, Ran was hysterical, blaming herself for her behavior. Because the alcohol had made her behave inappropriately, she acted like an older man trying to cling to a girl. It was decided to go and apologize first, so the lady went to the gentleman's office as soon as she got ready. The lady immediately asked for forgiveness, but the young man said the same thing in response. The brunette calmly explained that he forgave the lady for her strange behavior. He should be kind and gentle, which is exactly what the beauty said when they had a conversation. The man brought up the topic of something else, and this was a positive reaction. He had already mentioned that she needed to take up dancing, but now he reminded her again that she should take it seriously. The heroine nodded. She wanted to mention something else. She wanted to change the sugar production so that they could eat it whenever they wanted. The blue-eyed one thought that it was available to them. In the capital, everyone was interested in the wings of the heavenly stallion. When the thing was put on a horse, transparent, shiny wings appeared. As far as the heroine knew, the empire was the first to do this, and then the rest of the nobility followed suit. Latium, as a supplier, was obliged to give the Golden Rose a small percentage. The girl was only afraid of meeting the Empress. She knew that as soon as she found out about the crystal mining, she would immediately start demanding a huge tax. The Emperor distributed lands and titles to his vassals about 300 years ago, but the duchy is different from them, because it is an ancient family that already existed at that time. It was called the Protector of the Door. In fact, magicians can approach the ice wall, which is why the first emperor was not able to reach the lands and drive out Latium. The leader bowed his head, but also paid very low taxes. The blonde understood that once they had a mine, everything had to change. Previously, they had excuses about poverty, but now they would have to ruin their relationship with the ruler. Yustaf proposed to do as they had agreed. Earlier, there had been talk of slightly raising the tax before the royal retinue set its sights on the duchy's property. The next day, the lady got ready to leave. She didn't want to leave the estate right after the new year, but she also didn't want to miss out on the good weather. An opportunity like that rarely comes along. Before leaving, Ran promised to bring something as a gift. Due to the snow, she was forced to travel by sled, but with the help of heating and clothing, everything was quite bearable. When the lady arrived in the capital, a whole month had passed. It was very warm there, yet compared to the north, being in this place was ideal. The lady was happy about this and did not even regret that she spent too much time traveling. Compared to the winter winds of Latium, the cool breeze in the city moderately chilled the skin, forcing one to relax. The woman received many invitations to events and conversations almost immediately upon arrival. Ribori met with Milady first. Everyone already knew that the most popular person was Romia, although the family still did not take direct part in the trade. There was no established business system in the country, and it seemed impossible for the head of the duchy to engage in trade directly. So Latium had to find a way out and hire a team. To advance the ice crystals, an audience with His Majesty would be necessary, but it had already been scheduled. Ribaudy asked to be careful not to die at the hands of Marquis Cameron. He used to be the sole owner of the mine, although they said he wasn't a very good trader, so now even his small income should have been cut off. The reason for the high cost of diamonds is their rarity. If you look at the volume of reserves, it seems that there are quite a lot of them. And all this, of course, is due to marketing. Ran had a clear plan. Ribaudy had to tell everyone that, despite the fact that the imperial family had the right to use the services of magicians, they also had ice crystals. Latium will sell the special magical items created by the elves and dwarves to the upper classes for exorbitant prices, all to fill the treasury. Rumors spread very quickly, all of them about the upcoming reception in the duchy. Then it became impossible to get an invitation, because it was given only to fairly influential aristocrats. Along with popularity came negative talk, with many discussing the chapter itself, saying it didn't deserve anything good, since it didn't even contain the blood of the dead duke. Ran tried not to pay attention to the gossip because she didn't care. She had her own plan. The number of suitors kept increasing, although she said that she definitely wasn't going to get married. The lady was once again presented with a bouquet, but this time it was unusual, as it consisted only of flowers that grew in the south. The maids exclaimed that every woman dreams of something like this, but the woman had her own ideas. Soon Rolf reported that Marquis Cameron had come to see the lady. This was not the first time the man had tried to arrange a meeting, and finally Rand decided to come out and talk to Dot all the eyes. Initially, they offered her to simply skip, but it was impossible to refuse so easily. After all, the man most likely would not calm down. Having descended into the main hall, the girl greeted him. The old man did the same in return, albeit with reproach. He was definitely irritated. The girl seemed impudent to him, just like to many who spread nasty rumors. The Marquis began with the most important thing, because he came to give the final warning. A person who is not part of the aristocracy does not know the rules, but they still exist. The green-eyed woman started the game only to eventually become a monopolist and deprive Cameron of everything he had acquired. They say that he recently began attracting master magicians himself, so his words were meaningless. The woman tried to remain calm and reasonable. She decides for herself what price to set for her goods, so she sees no need to listen to another person's opinion. When Cameron rasped out that the guild belonged to him, he received a reasonable answer. Mages cannot belong to just one person. Out of anger, the old man jumped up and ran away. Perhaps he would send a deputy. Blaine nodded when the girl asked to strengthen security. Of course, the brunette wasn't sure how feasible his request was, but the leader would have to skip some social events. Unfortunately, the lady had no choice in this case. The girl asked if they would attack Latium itself. It was too cold to start military action. Winter was not over yet, and moreover, the Emperor's permission would be needed. There was still time to think. Someone knocked. The maid announced that Madame Rabori had arrived. She introduced Madame Nuaz. She speaks with the accent of northern royal blood. Almost immediately, the girl asked the head to change her dress. The beauty's clothes were old-fashioned. Everyone in high society knows how to dress properly, but of course, the girl came from the north. She does not know about this and all the necessary details. The beauty was helped to choose the best dress, and now she finally went to an audience with Her Majesty. The woman was offered to sit in an empty seat, informed that the prince's wife would also be present. A few hours before the meeting, the girl was enjoying tea. She was happy that Latium would sell her that very stallion stone. The peace was interrupted when the princess asked for an audience. Olivia Fran-La-Martel was allowed into the hall. She is elegant and graceful, but she cannot take care of her husband. The woman immediately asked how the couple was doing. Their relationship is a separate topic. The lady's concern, of course, was the prince. It is unknown where this came from in his blood, but he was a dissolute man. The lady married him to a wise duchess, but it turned out that he already had 2 illegitimate children. Lisa didn't know, but the master told his wife that the lady was good and probably better than Olivia. The prince was the weakest, which meant the princess would become the intermediate boss. The duchess did not want to become an enemy of the future ruler. Initially, the green-eyed one had heard a lot of gossip, but did not believe that all of it was true. Olivia showed up a little later and asked for forgiveness. Of course, the lady forgave her, because there was no problem with that. They should have gotten down to the conversation itself as soon as possible. Since the Duchess and the Princess had not met in person before, they had to introduce themselves to each other. Latium said that it was an honor for her to meet Her Highness. The blonde soon noticed that the heater was turned on almost full. At this rate, the crystal would soon be used up. The conversation turned to the head of the Golden Rose. She was half-elf. Olivia thought that she couldn't be trusted and that nothing should be given into her hands at all. The girl gave the answer that Rabori had instructed her to give, as if she knew what would happen. One of the ladies who was also present suddenly said that she heard that Cameron personally came and threatened. The blonde thanked her for her concern, but there was just a misunderstanding between them. The Marquis family also has a long history and has been loyal to the royal family, of course. This is true, but Latium could boast of the same. The duchy has several advantages associated with the stones received from the first and ruler lion, which means that Cameron should not meddle where it does not belong. The woman tried to change the subject, doing it delicately. She was glad that she could eat her fill of sweet and luxurious dessert. She hoped that Latium would also soon be able to make sugar. The girl finally left the meeting. She looked tired and was about to go and rest, but then she bumped into the prince, who immediately turned to her. His luxurious appearance matched his status, but inside he was a real libertine, so the lady found it a little unpleasant to communicate with him. The young man could not restrain himself. He knew that the daughter of the duke's family was beautiful, but when he saw her, he realized that she was still much better. The woman laughed awkwardly, saying that she could not compare with Olivia. The blonde did not want to talk, especially when she was very tired. She said that if an invitation was sent, then they could talk about this topic. The prince was still able to persuade Ladium to take a short walk in the garden, but the hero was simply a womanizer because he began asking indecent questions. When the lady asked him not to talk about it, the young man reacted strangely. The girl was able to leave. She was not happy with his company. The gentleman wondered what would happen if he enlisted the support of the future head of Yustafa and asked him to help. Once Yust becomes the head, as it should be, Ran will be of no use to anyone, and all that remains is to pick up her words, fallen fruit. The important day had arrived. The mistress had ordered uniforms for the maids, and now, finally, they were to be delivered to the place. Everyone wanted to see how the clothes would fit them. The new collection was intended to strengthen the sense of belonging to Latium, and with this, Romia also planned to reinforce the family's unshakable image. Everything was fine, except for the prince, who spoiled the whole mood. In the original, he was already dead, but in reality, he caused a lot of problems, because rumors had already started spreading that he had fallen in love with the Duchess. The woman could not withstand the pressure. She had no other option but to ask for an audience with His Majesty, since only the Emperor could stop his son. Suddenly, a servant ran in. It turned out that a military man had arrived. It was a herald with a declaration of war on behalf of Cameron. The heroine herself went down to immediately read the letter. The Marquis's army had probably already begun to act, which meant it was on the territory of the duchy. The blonde was skeptical. She hadn't expected everything to happen so soon. A feeling of loss overwhelmed the lady. She took many of their knights with her to the capital. Only Yustaf remained. She would not have had time to return anyway. Blaine asked the woman to believe in the best. The knights could not understand who would think of invading the duchy during winter. Apparently, the army's actions were aimed more at robbing ordinary people than at attacking. Yustaf was angry that the Marquis had allowed this to happen. The road through the valley was covered with dust like earth, and in the winter it turned into mud, making it difficult to move. It seems that Cameron thought that since the leader had left and taken the knights with her, there was almost no one left in Latium. They believed that they could easily win, since Yustaf did not yet know how to use the blue flame. After some time, it became clear to everyone that the duchy's chances of victory were increasing, and one of the knights stepped forward and demanded to engage in a duel. Taking off his helmet, the young man introduced himself as Agol, the eldest son of the Marquis. The brunette believed that he would be able to win during the battle. In terms of build, they were roughly similar to Latium. After 10 minutes of the duel, it became clear that the Marquis would lose. A sword was put to his throat. Recently, the war is considered suspended, because knowing that they have been caught, they do not kill. Yustaf did not want to put up with anything on the territory of Latium. He made it so that the young man could never breathe again, and immediately the cries of the knights were heard praising him. As soon as the man met the lady, his sister immediately ran towards him. They hugged, because she was very worried. Yustaf spoke to her. The hero's voice changed. He seemed to become more masculine. During this time, his height also increased. He no longer looked like an ordinary boy and began to resemble more the one who would one day take the reign of the duchy into his own hands. Yus didn't think the girl would be so happy to see him. She said out loud that the young man had become different now. The suit was a little unsuitable. The girl hadn't seen this option before, but it didn't look new. The brunette said that Ross had given him the clothes because he needed something new. The blonde suggested they quickly choose something else and asked if the young man had gotten hurt during the duel. The hero explained that everything was fine and that he didn't need any care. The woman shook her head, saying that even if her brother were a legendary warrior, he would still be at risk. In fact, about 3 days after the war began, someone asked the lady for an audience. The lady nodded. She asked to let in the person who was waiting for her in the corridor. She was eager to know why they had come to her. The second shadow of the head greeted the girl and said that there was nothing to worry about, because Yustaf was confidently winning. In Latium, as it turned out, there was a secret organization about which the lady knew nothing. The man was confident of victory, since the master was ready for it. However, apparently, the Marquis made a deal with the Emperor that in case of victory, he would give up half of the mines. It finally became clear to the lady why she was being ignored. The king was trying too hard to grab an advantage that would ultimately never come. All of Laban's pocket money went to the guild, and the girl asked to find out everything about the ruler's second son. Now, 3 days later, the beauty was choosing an outfit for her brother. She asked about his height. He was almost 180 centimeters. Not long ago, they were the same. Everything changed. It turned out that the Marquis wanted to challenge the gentleman to a duel, but it seemed that nothing would come of it. The man asked to finish the fitting later and turned to the lady, asking why she was trying to find out information about the prince. The heroine wanted to start a rebellion. There was no other reason, the woman exhaled. She would like that man not to become the next ruler. The girl's words seemed to indicate that she didn't want to be in this country. She was behaving strangely. The young man sat down next to her and asked what had happened. The lady shook her head, saying she couldn't tell her brother the information. The brunette exhaled. In any case, they are not related. Then the heroine lost it and told about all the unpleasant comments. Because of the gentleman's behavior, the woman wanted to support the princess, who did not love the blonde man. The brunette listened to everything. He looked calm, but said that then he would talk to the man about everything himself. The girl didn't immediately understand what this was all about. She could have met him on her own and pretended that they weren't on bad terms. The blue-eyed man turned away. The lady was still amazed at how such an emotionless man fell in love with Sheena. Everyone wanted to meet Yustaf. His exploits had reached the capital, and he also needed to resolve the situation with Kimuran. Initially, it seemed that the lady would ask about the Green Shadow, but she did not want to start this conversation. For the blonde, nothing mattered. Less than a year remained until the end of her term in office. The heroine completely forgot that she had asked to find out about the sap of the snow-white tree. The man brought a sample with him. Now in Latium, they could eat sugar as much as they wanted and prepare various desserts and drinks from it. A few days later, a meeting was held between Laban and Cameron in the Crystal Hall of the Imperial Palace. People lined up just to see Yustaf. He seemed incredible to them. Still, it was hard for the lady to hear the cries of the Marquis, who had lost his son, and even the heir. A whole line of people wanted to talk to the man formed. The girl tried to move away from the crowd. A scream was heard. Cameron's daughter was incredibly angry. She wanted her brother back. When the woman swung at the head, the brother pulled her aside. The guards had to do their job. Yus did not kill the Duke. He was consumed by his father's ambitions. If the maiden was dissatisfied, she was obliged to turn to her father. Perhaps the young man would not have said anything if the stranger had attacked him, but she swung at his sister, who was defenseless. What happened in the corridor of the Crystal Hall was on everyone's lips for a long time. Some were against the Marquise's daughter, and some pitied her. Along with this, rumors began to circulate that the cold man was treating Rand with trepidation. The lady was talking to Ridget. They were discussing the latest happenings in high society. The girl was happy to finally find a friend. In the capital, this was a very difficult task. Not everyone could handle it. Being the Marquis's wife was quite a heavy burden for her, although she was asked not to worry about anything, but this was unrealistic. The blonde asked not to think about it so much. In any case, Ridget liked the Empire. She would not have any problems. The woman lost her temper and started asking questions about Latium. First asking about the ice wall. The lady couldn't just leave, so she began to answer, trying to smile, and her friend asked to be invited to the estate. The beauty suddenly remembered that the lady had recently been in a difficult situation because of the crown prince. Rand is actually quite tired and hopes that it will all end soon. They pester her more, and Olivia's look becomes angrier. In any case, the lady was going to talk about this with His Majesty, since business with the Marquis was already finished. When the conversation on this topic came to an end, Ridget suggested that next time they go on a picnic with her family. The princess, as it turned out, continued to use contraception even after the wedding. An heir is the only way to take power for herself, which means the lady is probably thinking about something else. Yustaf was distracted because a guest arrived to see him, who turned out to be the crown prince. The blonde didn't want greetings and formalities. He came to talk as a person. He had his own desire. The hero wanted to say that he was on the side of the heir, who knew that the Duchess was still more famous than him. Blue Eyes must take care of his role and future, because soon Rand will no longer be the mistress. The prince wanted to help. No matter how good the Duchess was, she did not belong to the Latian family. If she lost support, she would become an ordinary person. The woman will leave on her own, because she will not be able to remain in control when, for example, she becomes pregnant. Yes, easily refused. After the meeting, he had a desire to wash himself because he was incredibly disgusted. No, there was nothing to worry about. The gentleman assured his sister that everything would be fine and asked if she would like to return to Latium. The youth also received the report about the second prince that the leader had originally requested. The brunette still felt strange. He understood that you can't trust anyone, especially you need to be careful with someone who says that he loves you. Blue-Eyed asked what his sister would do if she was betrayed. She jumped up and threw up her hands in displeasure. The girl chuckled. It would probably hurt her a lot. And then he would again meet the Ran who was evil before. If a man decides to do something like this, It is better to warn him in advance so that Rumija does not interfere with him. When the woman picked up the report sheet, she realized that it was impossible to read what was written. The conversation turned to the crown princess, who was constantly picking on Ran and wasn't someone who wanted to be kind. The woman asked her brother to rewrite everything in his normal handwriting and finally received answers to her questions. Raval Monia Lamartelle is 2 years younger than the crown prince. He will be 26 years old. Nothing was found to catch on. The paper accidentally caught fire, and it seemed like a blue flame came out, which is enough to scare someone who doesn't know. The girl decided to meet with the second prince. She wanted to ask for an audience, but the man had another option. All the wives throughout the ages in Latium have tended a garden to compensate for their infertile lands, yet this place is worthy of being called the Green Arch. When the gentleman met Romija, he began to understand why his brother continued to run after her. The brunette did not think that he would be invited alone. She had a personal interest in him that was different. Perhaps the green-eyed girl wanted to show that she was interested in Ravel as a groom, since his brother was already taken. After drinking the tea, the young man froze. The sugar was different from what he had tried before, but it was even more delicious. The young man immediately warned that he did not like the noise and did not like being used, but they explained to him that for now, they were having a friendly meeting. When they got up from the table to take a short walk in the garden, Ravel noticed someone in the bushes, and Yustaf came out from there. The prince greeted the future leader. He had heard a lot about him, but he remained skeptical, as it was probably just another rumor. When they said goodbye, the man laughed. It will be difficult for the Duchess to get married because of her family. The girl has an incredible younger brother, and the lady agreed with this because she considered him one of the best people in her life. For now, Ran has everything, but if Yuz really wants to gain power, he will first have to banish his sister. The Duchess could always rely on His Highness, but she shook her head because she believed that she would never come to him. The next day, the lady was getting ready. Yustaf sat next to her while she was being prepared for going out and having her makeup applied. Finally, when everything was finished, the woman understood what needed to be done to get ready to go out, the last appointment, after which she would be able to rest. It was hard for the blonde. She couldn't, like other girls, enjoy finding a husband and going to social events. For Latium, the road to high society was icy, a place where attractions and repulsions took place. Before getting into the carriage, the lady expressed her hope that she would return soon and not be tired. Within the first 10 minutes of the reception, Ran met with the head of the Miro clan, the elder brother of Crown Princess Olivia. He was honored to meet the lady, and he introduced himself as Duan Doskla Miro, speaking calmly. The influence of the duchy was heard even in distant lands, and the lady tried precisely for this purpose, to gain publicity. The first reason why the family was called White Silver Miro was because of their excellent hair color, and the second was because they owned a large mine of white silver. Their duchy was located closer to the center, which is why it has traditionally had the closest relationship to the emperor since ancient times. Thanks to the mine, the family has a high status in political circles and has a solid capital behind them. When the man reminded her that he was Olivia's older brother, the girl immediately said that she and the prince were perfect for each other and that she didn't want to threaten him. The voice of the future emperor was heard. He said something about a bright future, but the lady did not listen. She wanted him to leave. The man, without thinking twice, invited the lady to dance. He was not embarrassed by anything, since everyone should already know that he was in love, and there was nothing left to do but pretend that the Duchess was fainting. Blaine was thanked for helping carry the lady out. He felt sorry to see the prince's bad manners. The woman didn't know how this story would affect her, but she hoped that she and Miro would not become enemies. At dinner, the lady told her brother everything. She was still very angry because she didn't know what to do. A letter arrived. It seems that Rumier was found, and in a few days, they were also supposed to attend Marquis Kirkus's picnic. The girl was supposed to attend such an event for the first time, but the same thing had happened in her brother's life. While the lady was thinking, everyone left. The young man suggested dancing, which was strange. They didn't even have music. Yustaf stood up and pointed to the music box, in which case they started dancing. Everything wasn't so bad. Rand began to think that it wasn't just the man's height that had changed. It was as if he had become a completely different person, especially in his dance. The heroine accidentally stepped on her foot again. This time, she was even more absent-minded, but she wanted to try. Soon, the dance ended. The room was filled with good energy, which made the soul feel good. The time had finally come to send a letter in response to the Count. The girl was already getting ready for bed, but first she sat down at the table and picked up paper and a pen. Obviously, It was her responsibility to rescue Rumi, but if she took on all this personally, she would end up in danger. The woman sent a message. She was still glad that the hero was found so quickly. She went to rest. In the morning, the girl was ready. She understood that a busy day awaited her, because they were going to Elenia Park. Ridget was thrilled to be attending the first picnic of the new season and couldn't stop talking about it. When the girl learned that this was the first such outing in the Duchess's life, she looked surprised. For her, everything was fun. When the man noticed that the lady liked everything, she became indignant because she was happy to spend time with her loved ones. Yustaf introduced himself to the Marquis, initially talking about how his sister was an outstanding person. The two agreed on their interest in chivalry. Yus would like to hear a story, since Karok once managed to single-handedly catch Zeronicle. Ridget raised an eyebrow in displeasure. They went out to the lakeshore to have a picnic, but the stories reeked of blood. It became disgusting. Ran was actually enjoying her first vacation in a while, but someone who came later ruined her joy. The first guest was Harish, who, as usual, grimaced when he asked how people didn't feel disgusted when they were next to each other, like in an anthill. The man brought a sword that the lady had ordered as a birthday present for her brother. The woman thanked him, which wasn't a problem for Harish, but it turned out that elves weren't very good with metals, and the sword wasn't made of metal either. Virgo knows a lot, but not everything. They work with Shiva, and for her, magical processing is enough, nothing more. It turns out that in that world, high-quality and cheap metal weapons also sell well, and they are easier to handle. Less than a week later, another guest arrived, and the girl invited Fulton to sit at the table and finally talk. The woman wanted to communicate in this simple way, so that it would be easier to feel the atmosphere. The lady asked about the tea leaves and clarified whether they had been found, to which she received a suspicious question. Why were they needed at all? The sheets seemed to be in poor condition. Their quality was terrible. Perhaps they contained memories. The fact that the Count spoke of this meant that Rumi had most likely been taken to the arena. The maiden thought that she had more time left. Finally, the red-haired man understood what was being discussed, but the task was not easy, because, apparently, they were making money from tea leaves illegally. If the flower withers, it is unknown what will happen to the leaves, so the plant must be delivered with roots. Rumi had a younger sister. She had health problems, and therefore died after several months of fighting. The blonde believed that the young man was not yet in the arena, so she did not think about it, but now the girl is important. Since the buyer has stepped into all the dirt, they want to use and destroy him. Illuminite promised to find out about the flower. The woman considered whether she should ask Rabori to intervene. After all, she was a good protection for anyone who cooperated with her. After the maiden ceased to be the head, Rabori probably did not stab her in the back. She is not that kind of person. Thoughts about the prince were also in her head. After all, the lady had to meet with the emperor to ask him to keep the guy in check. The heroine was so lost in thought that she didn't notice Yustaf approaching, and she accidentally spilled the tea right on her dress. The robe still belonged to the Duchess's mother. She had hemmed it well. But still something was wrong. The young man noticed that more delicate colors suited his sister and switched to what he had been talking about with the Count. They discussed common affairs with Illuminite, but did not plan anything against him because they respect Yustaf. So, brother and sister threatened each other's position, especially considering the fact that they did not share the same blood. While the woman was thinking about how to explain herself, the hero began to smile, again asking her to change her clothes. That evening, the blue-eyed man finally checked who the Count was looking for, and that man turned out to be a slave fighting in the arena. It would have been more effective to search for the person with the green shadow, but the girl hid the fact that she was searching for an unknown slave. The young man did not know whether they were somehow connected in the past. He ignored his feelings and asked to assign security to the lady. Going out into the garden in the evening, the hero was surprised that his sister was completely alone. There was absolutely no one nearby. It was strange. The blonde shrugged. She had no need for knights on the estate grounds. That was just the way it was. The girl would not mind learning to swing a sword because she wanted to be able to defend herself. Since the girl could not sleep, she could be escorted to the school palace. The man lifted the head in his arms to carry it. Blaine arrived at the most inopportune moment and did not understand what was happening. He was asked to bring slippers. The beauty did not have an appointment with the knight. He probably had a date with one of the maids. When they arrived, the gentleman decided to start from the very basics, but the girl still wanted to learn. Yus handled the sword perfectly. The movement seemed simple, but the lady knew that this would not happen to her. The young man knelt down and began to wipe the beauty's feet. Slippers cannot be put on dirty feet. From now on, the green-eyed girl was strongly asked not to leave the house without shoes, as this is not according to the rules of etiquette. After this, the hero took up the sword. What he showed earlier was only part. It will be more difficult further. In the castle, from early morning, there was a conversation between Olivia and her brother. He did not understand what the prince was thinking about and why he allowed himself to be obscene. The kingdom still needs Miro, so the maiden will be of help, and over time the master will understand that his wife needs to be treated well. The lady understood why her man fell in love with Latium, but she was not so simple to deal with. The head was angry at the Duchess. Their family was generally an accidentally rolled stone, but Miro could not even receive the same treatment as them. Latium is an ancient land. The ice wall, the heavenly estate, and the door were there even before the first emperor appeared. Although Ran is the head, she is temporary. She will soon lose her power. Then she will become the prince's plaything and will be thrown out. The sister noted that she might even be envious of Latium, but she had her own path and her own plans for the future. The prince sent the lady flowers again, but she had received money from Ribori, so she had to take care of her duchy. The girl asked her friend to make a fake ID, all for visiting the slave. Ribori agreed to do everything for free, and the conversation turned to the fact that the explosive contract would soon expire. All this was worth lending 1 million. Ribori wanted to offer to extend the contract for another year. The lady would like to raise the price of crystals by 20% and the purchase price by 5%, giving a deposit of 10 million. The heroine suggested that the leader join their trading guild as soon as she was no longer in charge. The prince was furious because he was not allowed to show up at the ball. Miro also intervened in this. The young man did not leave everything and decided to talk to his father. Blue-eyed came from afar. He said that he had found a plan to fragment Latium. The emperor would also like to receive the suddenly increased duchy. The offer had to be one that couldn't be refused. The king nodded and asked what the plan was. The next day, permission to enter the castle arrived for Yustaf, but it was unclear why this was necessary. Whatever the case, the lady put aside her worries. She almost began to breathe easier. She would be glad that the young man would go to social events. For the first time, the hero had to go to a ball in the imperial castle, for which he would have to wear new clothes. Rumors that Laban would soon appear at the ball spread throughout aristocratic society. The garden where everything took place was filled to the brim with objects created using ice crystals. The arrival of the Latian family was announced. People looked at them attentively because everyone was interested. Her Majesty the Empress personally greeted the couple and was happy that they were able to come. The blonde introduced Yustafa properly. A lot had been heard about him, but seeing him in person was always better. A man should enjoy himself to the fullest, but remember that there were many ladies nearby who would want to dance with him. In fact, the Empress is right. The Duke is already popular, but he is also unmarried and incredibly handsome. The hero turned to his sister, tearing her out of her thoughts. He offered to dance with him despite the fact that Ran was still bad at it. Previously, the lady often stepped on the young man's feet, but this time her steps seemed lighter. Yus had definitely become better at dancing. It seems that the talent appeared on its own, but the hero explained that he trained because he wanted to be the best. Because of his dancing abilities, the ladies at the ball began to show even greater interest in Yustaf. People always said that perhaps the Duke was ugly or looked bad, but all the rumors were dispelled. Everyone knew that Latium was also rapidly accumulating enormous capital and had a bright future ahead of him. At this rate, someone could take Yustafa away. The woman asked her brother to wait for his fate and not run after the first girl. It was awkward to talk about the topic, but the lady wanted to ask him to wait for his love. The most important thing is feelings. The young man said that he would decide for himself what to do and asked not to make a sad face. Otherwise, everyone would think that the brother and sister had quarreled. A familiar voice was heard. Rigid could not imagine that they would meet Yustaf in such a place. The Marquis didn't come, and he didn't care that the Duke was making his debut. Within 5 minutes, a multitude of aristocrats had gathered around. The lady decided to run away before it was too late, but she was stopped and asked where she was going. She needed to pick up a drink. When the lady finally received the glass, the prince approached her. The maiden was surprised, because she did not expect to meet him in such a place. The man didn't want to give his invitation to someone else. He started talking about the Green Arch and why the girl had dressed everyone in new uniforms. Everyone liked the idea, but of course, it came at a high cost. The prince admitting that Latium had accumulated great wealth. The crown princess appeared. She didn't know that the prince and duchess were so close. She received an invitation to the garden, but even Olivia wasn't supposed to do that. The woman did not want to discuss a not very interesting topic and turned towards Mustafa. The young man is quite popular. The girl was also surprised by this, most likely. Ron is glad that she has such a purebred brother. They wanted to escape from Olivia, but just as a new melody began, the girl warned at the last moment that she was a bad dancer. After just half an hour, the young man almost stopped feeling his legs. It was as if she was deliberately stepping on them with her boots 100 times a minute. However, the dance was over. The man suggested going for a walk. The lady's mood was spoiled because Olivia was with Yus. The Duchess was sorry that she could not change history. Apparently, the princess had already fallen in love with Laban. His Highness assumed that the lady was experiencing such emotions because she liked the young man, and she began to apologize. The woman shouldn't have given in to her feelings. All was not lost yet. It wasn't worth losing concentration. They found themselves in the farthest part of the garden, where the lady had never been before. At night, there was nothing to see because of the darkness. People in love are the only ones who could appreciate the place at its true value. It was about an overnight honeymoon. The brunette thought about it. For a girl with a beautiful appearance and popularity, she looks more like a spectator and seems not to believe that her time to shine will ever come. It was time to return, but before that, the girl was told something she didn't know. The invitation for use was issued personally by the crown prince. The young man had his own motives. He was probably doing this to stir up conflict in Latium. While the lady was thinking, a voice was heard. She did not want to be near this man, so she wanted to leave. Someone grabbed her by the hand, stopping her. The maiden threatened to scream, but she was allowed to. The gentleman could say that she had seduced him and even tell the details. It was decided to speak calmly. The lady asked to let her go and promised not to run away, but instead the body was pulled closer. The man suddenly flew to the side. Yus arrived in time and hit the prince, asking if his sister was okay. The girl looked down at the floor. Everything was fine. But she was a little scared, because she didn't expect such behavior. By then, the young man had jumped up from the ground and was shouting loudly, asking if Yus wanted to be accused of treason. When the empress arrived, the blonde man began to scream louder, asking to lock the brat in the dungeon for his behavior. Yes noticed a bruise on his hand, so he challenged the prince to a duel. This would happen another day, but for now they were getting ready to leave because the girl was not feeling well. The empress allowed them to leave because the duchess really did look bad. The mother ordered her son to shut up and cool his head. She was tired of his behavior. In the carriage, Laban asked once again if his sister was okay. The future emperor was to blame for everything. He had behaved terribly. Despite the fact that the lady assured everyone of her calm, tears rolled down her cheeks on their own, and they hugged her to calm her down. The duel still remained a problem because if the prince was suddenly wounded, the palace might suddenly refuse to use the crystals of Latium. Blue-Eyed was calm. The product was being supplied not only within the empire, everything would be fine. The duchess's face seemed to ask if this was her brother's plan, but he shook his head. If the gentleman had had an idea, he would have acted differently and prevented what happened in the garden. Most likely, the prince will use a substitute in the duel. The young man had another idea. Perhaps the emperor would be used to show his greatness. He suggested trying to stir up the quarrel between son and father. This would be the first step. Recently, Yusuf has become more gentle. At first, everything was much worse, and the duchess was incredibly happy about this. The brunette remembered seeing the lady leave with the second prince, and he was lucky that when he returned alone, he decided to go check. In any case, the whole society will find out about what happened last night. It would be better to tell everything as it is before someone distorts the truth. The sister was awakened. They had already arrived at the Green Arch. The knights must listen to what happened in the garden. The head maid was called to help the head change his clothes, get a new hairstyle, and touch up his makeup. Everyone was called into the office to be allowed to find out everything personally. This was the only way out of the situation. The servants were outraged. They could not believe that the prince allowed himself to do something so indecent. They were asked to calm down. It shouldn't all end with just his apology, first of all. The Duke wanted to see what would happen with the dual application. Tomorrow there will be rumors spreading that will humiliate Latium. But it's good that the servants learned about everything from the first persons. The image of a powerless and simple-minded person suits the Duchess, so the lady allowed rumors to spread. Eustace didn't like the press, but it was a great gossip-mongering situation, and the Lindbog mistake wouldn't be repeated. In the New World, reading books and newspapers became the prerogative of high-ranking families, so servants' conversations became as important as news. It would be a good idea to break the prince's support. The lady wanted to do this the next day. In the morning, Yus and the maiden arrived at the imperial palace. She introduced him and thanked him for allowing them to enter. Thanks to the gentleman, everything was settled between the Marquis and the Duke, which made the girl even more devoted. The brunette said that his sister was very scared that day, but she only sobbed and said that everything was fine. Laban fell to his knees and began to ask for permission to duel. He wanted to return his sister's honor at any cost. In the end, everything ended well. The young man thanked him, but in the carriage he noticed that the king was as stupid as his son. The Duchess knows very well how strong Mustafa's pride can be, and she knows how difficult it is to overcome pride. The man asked if the lady really wanted to become his sister, and if she really considered him her brother, although they had no connection. Mustafa didn't scold the girl or interrogate her. He is with her for another reason. Everything is a little more complicated than it might seem. The young man couldn't tell the whole truth, but he had once planned to reveal all his cards, and the heroine had to be ready. According to research, Baron Gurn is a close friend of the prince. He is a known scoundrel. He can be bribed. The man won't be killed. Yus isn't that stupid. He appointed a new maid for the lady. She almost immediately visited the head and introduced herself as Demodia Ruste. Count Bellone was the one who initially gave orders to the Green Shadow. My brother probably brought Dia specifically. Large sums of money were spent on collecting information for Latium, but it was all justified. Having power is always good. The prince was indignant. His father ordered him to personally participate in the duel, and so they quarreled once again. The blonde promised himself that he would kill everyone so that they would incredibly deeply regret having done something wrong. The emperor began to support Latium, and public interest turned not to the Duchess, but to the duel. The girl tried to suggest something, but she was shut up, saying that Ran and Olivia were too impudent, and the princess couldn't even give birth to a child. The blonde was angry. Her husband was so stupid that he couldn't even be used as a puppet. It would be better if he died in a duel. In the morning, Rigid arrived at the estate, still unable to recover from the news and what had happened in the garden. The Marquis also arrived because he agreed to help. It was decided that only he would be able to do this, unlike everyone else. Kirkus smiled. He would only be glad if the duchy remained in his debt for the help provided. The girl enjoyed the dessert. In Latium, they created cream, which originally did not exist in the world. News spread that the prince had recently been receiving training from the captain of the Imperial Guard. He is preparing for a duel. Because Ran asked for help, Kirkus could go out to fight against Ustaf. This will give him preparation. The young man gladly decided to accept the invitation. The girl thanked him. It was really important for them. Before starting the real fight, the man wanted to see the Duke's abilities. The Marquis was actually looking forward to the invitation. Rigid turned to Ran again, asking if she was okay. The blonde was a little worried. She was afraid that this duel would be more brutal, but she hoped for the best. Latium had only thought about how to make the duchy richer, but now she was faced with something terrible that she was not prepared for. The woman supported her friend. Yus will be fine, because Karak is training him. He is good at this, and will help with everything needed. It was time to discuss something else. After what happened, the girl began to suspect even more that Ram liked Mustafa. The way the gentleman treats Romija doesn't really look like a family relationship. He never even thought of the girl as a sister. At the moment, they remained in a mutually beneficial relationship. They had no other feelings. Ran seemed to always speak, excluding herself from any circumstances, as if she kept her distance. Ustaf made Kirkus feel vulnerable. He fought with all his strength, as if he was putting his life on the line. Still, the brunette lost because of the sword-to-the-throat technique. When asked, he said that he learned everything from Wild, the former head of the Knights of Latium. The man is good at such a young age. Katya would be interested to watch him in the future. Blue Eyes kept thinking, because in 3 days there was supposed to be a duel. It could threaten his vital forces. Ran came into the room, noticing Mustafa in a robe. She immediately blushed. It was incredible how she copes with her duties. Although she shows all her feelings, the Duke's monosyllabic answers were of no help at all. The girl saw that the documents had been sorted out for her and was grateful. The young man switched to a topic that Ran had not yet thought about. The river freezes in winter, and it would be better to build a dam in that place, next to the watermill. The girl managed with the help of her knowledge, but she obviously had shortcomings that they helped her to eliminate. It would be easier for Ustaf to be a duke when he grew up, but the danger of a duel still hung over him. Ran asked to be careful, but it was Laban's decision, and he promised that he would try his best. Dinner was to begin in 30 minutes, and the lady was going to warn the Marquis first. The head promised that she would come for her brother, but instead she spent more than an hour getting ready, as she needed to do her hair and makeup. The outfit was also perfectly chosen. the necklace matched Rand's eyes, and finally she was about to go out. There was a knock on the door and Yustaf was standing there. He decided that since the girl hadn't come, he should go and get her. The evening was filled with difficult thoughts. The only thing that helped calm me down was the fact that the lady would soon hand over her powers to her brother. She would miss Latium. During his studies, the young man always remained at the academy, even during holidays, and constantly received letters from Ran, which always had the same question. One day the girl came to meet, but the brunette didn't even go down to the office to meet with relatives. Everyone else thought it was too much, but the young man did not budge, thinking that after ignoring the lady, she would not come again. The woman did not live up to expectations, and after many times, Laban simply had no other choice. When the hero arrived in the hall, the girl was filled with joy, but immediately became sad when he left without even saying hello. This was the last memory of Ran before the death of their family. Then the story took a different turn. Before leaving, Ridget thanked her for the warm welcome and promised to invite Leisha over next time. The blonde quickly got drunk, even though she had only had 2 drinks. She always did everything quickly, leaving no one a single chance. Whenever the blonde was told something like this, she always said that it was just her character, nothing more. People with a hasty nature usually give up quickly, but for some reason Romy remained persistent. The girl admitted to Yustaf that he was right. She really doesn't think of him as her younger brother. In fact, for her, Laban was the main character. Of course, she didn't explain what exactly that meant. After the young gentleman had escorted the Duchess to her chambers, he met Blaine in the corridor. The brunette wanted to talk about what they had discussed earlier, but in any case, that was not the most important thing. Yustaf was quite tired, but since the knight had been waiting for him for a long time, they still decided to talk and went inside. Blaine said everything at once. He didn't start from afar. The gentleman assigned the green shadow to the Duchess. Wilde shouldn't say anything that's not in keeping with his position. The guild doesn't concern him in any way, much less their affairs. Ross is going to be appointed head of personal security. Everyone knows about his abilities and that he will be able to protect the lady. Earlier, the blue-eyed man asked to choose a good escort, and it seems that this person turned out to be just that. Yustaf agreed to what was offered to him, but first suggested listening to Lazia's own opinion. 3 days later, in front of the prince's palace, Olivia brought a handkerchief with prayers for victory and wanted to tie it on her hand. The man threw the thing away and shouted that he would win thanks to his luck. The woman gathered all her willpower not to shout, but simply smile. The atmosphere between the married couple is no joke. The Duchess approached Yustaf and asked him to be more careful. When the duel began, the young man very soon realized that the sword was ringing, and this indicated that magic was concentrated in it. The enemy wants Yust to drop his weapon. The prince has always been a coward, but this is an even lower method. Most likely, the magic was cast in advance. The man knew that he just needed to buy at least a minute of time. In just a moment, the blue-eyed man made the blonde lose his sword. He would have to go and pick it up. The master had to put pressure on the mage to cast magic. A little more and the enemy's weapon would fly apart. As the blue-eyed man had expected, everything worked. But when he was overjoyed, he received a knee blow to the face. The duel ended. Olivia wanted to clap, but instead she called the doctors. Ran rushed to the young man to hug him. The news of Yustafa's victory spread quickly, and along with it, everyone learned how exactly he had won. The master's sword was destroyed, and it immediately became clear that the prince had used forbidden magic. Soon the gentleman met the emperor's second son, who was an unusual guest for him. Laban was absolutely calm, and when he was told that the prince did not like criticism, he agreed, only about himself. The young man had to ask why Latius had come. Judging by what he had heard, the gentleman liked to be used. Smiling slightly, the duke suggested using others. He had come up with a very good plan. For now, both remained in silence, because they did not like noise, and there had to be time for thoughts too. The imperial family has its own duties. Just like Latium, there is no point in talking about it. The young man seemed to be hinting that the current heir had no right to become emperor. One could already see in advance what would happen to the empire. Laban offered the prince to become the leader, but he gave an ambiguous answer, because those who possess power have enemies. The hero did not want to hear a clear answer right away. He simply asked to be notified eventually. The brunette was left alone and began to think. The path to becoming emperor was full of difficulties, given the fact that his father was still in power. They had a wise daughter-in-law. She had a beautiful appearance and a political mind. She was always felt to be the best choice for the ruler's wife. To be on even the same level as the heir? I would have to marry an equally excellent person. The girl sat, thinking about what to answer in a letter for Count Illuminite, but she still managed to write something. It was raining heavily outside, but it promised to end soon. However, if it rained harder, we would have to return to Latium later. Dia suggested going out into the garden. The drops hadn't become strong yet, and having tea outside would be a great idea. The girl agreed, but Ross appeared out of nowhere and thought the idea was frivolous. The heroine thought that the knight would not try to accompany the lady, but he agreed and carried her in his arms so as not to get his shoes dirty. The brunette snorted in displeasure. He couldn't let Yustaf know that he wasn't capable of even the most basic tasks. The blonde noticed that the guy was doing dangerous work, and it wasn't about him wanting to do it for the master. The heroine was glad to have the opportunity to drink tea in peace, and she also invited the maids to join her. The lady was tired of drinking tea alone all the time. She would also like to listen to stories about what was happening inside the mansion. The maids liked the uniform, and everyone around them treated them with great respect, understanding that they came from the Green Arch. Everyone was filled with aspiration, and the lady understood that everything was not in vain. Clothes were still very important for the spirit of the duchy. Yustafa's voice was heard. He came right in the rain, apparently attracted by the aroma of tea. The girl quickly held out her shawl, but her sister was completely dry, as if she had wings. Ross carried the lady to the gazebo, and for this the gentleman thanked him, but the words made him embarrassed. Before her brother arrived, the young lady talked with the maids. She knew she could talk to them another day. The woman quietly asked what had happened and where Yustaf had gone. The young man only wanted to talk about personal matters. They started talking, but the man answered in monosyllables. Rand asked him to communicate more simply, otherwise nothing would work out. In fact, they didn't have to talk about topics that would make them feel embarrassed. They weren't in that kind of relationship, and even that would end very soon. The maiden was pondering what to talk about until she noticed a hole in the marble. The estate had probably been built a long time ago. The man looked closely, wondering what the stone thought every time a drop of water fell on it. At first, he probably thought about how tired he was of it, but then he decided that he didn't care. The stone realized there was a hole in it when the sound of the water became less unusual. Soon, the annoying sound of the collision was replaced by a melody filled with the ringing sound of a splash. The fact that the raindrops did not fall with the intention of destruction seems very stupid and incomprehensible. By evening, the rain promised to become even heavier, and they had to stay in the Green Arch, which may have been for the better. The lady doesn't know whether she wants to return to Latium, because there are many things to do there, but she still asked her brother about his opinion. Soon, a letter arrived from the Count. The flower was torn off, he found it, but this was not a reason for joy. As the man expected, he was unable to obtain tea leaves. The only seller wanted to see the buyer in person. The girl had no choice but to find out what the arena and the capital was connected to. Then the issue would be resolved in the royal castle. The next day, the lady informed the Illuminite that she would go and personally look at the product she needed. Rand must have had a card up her sleeve since she didn't know what the price would be. She could go herself. Suddenly, an idea came to mind. The girl told Dija that she was going to sneak out at night and asked her to stay nearby. The blonde hesitated. She didn't know that the Duchess already knew that she was from the Green Shadow. The maid agreed and promised to keep everything a secret. Yustaf did not need to know the details. Once the lady finishes with everything, she will probably not see Rumie again, so it would be easier for her not to bother anyone. At some point, hope appeared in my soul that I wouldn't have to leave the duchy, but these were just thoughts. At night, the girl met with the Count. He did not think that the Duchess would come and even dress in hidden clothes. Before heading to the place, the Illuminite asked not to call him by name and not to reveal his either. My sister had already been taken away from security, but she was not in a very favorable environment, so she feels unwell. The lady walked down an alley that was full of beggars. There were many children there, and it broke her heart. Finally, they reached the meeting place. Arka introduced himself and said that it was an honor for him to meet the buyer. The man realized from her head that there was a girl in front of him. It was strange to understand that she wanted to buy a gladiator. The lady believed the Count, but asked him to bring the item so that she could check everything again, just in case. Rumie entered the room. The heroine nodded and suggested moving on to the deal. She needed to finish this matter as soon as possible. Arka wanted to meet in person precisely because of trust. He couldn't just sell the goods without clearly understanding to whom. In transactions, one must be extremely precise. The lady asked what kind of trust exists between the master and the slaves. The brunette snorted. He definitely had no intention of developing a relationship with useless scum. After answering, the lady said that it was strange because as far as she knew, Rumie's younger sister was with the gentleman, and the place where she was recently attacked and burned to the ground. Arka screamed. He was sure that the girl would die because she needed a medicine that only he had. He was cut down. All this time the girl was receiving a drink of sleeping pills and wine. When Rumie heard all this, he reacted quickly, attacking the gentleman, killing him, and then dealing with his assistants. When it was all over, while the lady was trying to come to her senses, the man approached her. It seemed that he was about to attack, but instead the red-haired man fell to his knees and began kissing his mistress's feet. The girl was called the mistress, but she really didn't like it, so she decided to ask that it not be done in the future. Voices of people from the guild were heard. They urgently needed to get out. Rumie said that he knew a secret passage. Everyone went down the stairs. The exit was in the north direction. 2 more were located in the east and west. The girl was still upset. She told Ark everything so that he would understand that he could no longer command the slave. It was known that even an angry man would not kill someone who is an aristocrat. The lady asked for help in removing the chains because it was not right for everyone to see him walking around, dragging his past behind him. Daya asked if the Duchess was okay, and she nodded. She shouldn't push herself too hard. There was no point. The girl apologized to the Illuminite. His identity would be at risk because of what happened. The young man said that everything was fine because he was going to get rid of the Ark sooner or later. When they finally went, the chains were finally removed from the young man. His sister was on the top floor, but was still sleeping. The Count asked what the Duchess was going to do. She was going to release the slave and end the matter there. The gentleman nodded. Perhaps he should have kept silent, but the guy's sister was sick. If things were left as they were, she would most likely die. The lady decided to deal with this later. Arka could have sent pursuers, but he was a bad man in business, and many would surely be glad of his death. Most likely, those who were close to that man will first start sorting things out among themselves. They won't go looking for the killer. Finally, Rumie returned. He washed himself, and they gave him new clothes. Yet he was as handsome as on the pages of a book. The guy was taken to his sister, who was sleeping, because she had no strength. He asked her to come closer. After permission, the young man sat down on the bed. The mistress invited the servants to leave, but at that moment the girl opened her eyes. Almost immediately, Lily realized that it was her brother in front of her, and bursting into tears, she rushed to hug him. The little girl couldn't stop screaming. She missed him very much, since they hadn't seen each other for quite a while. The young man closed his eyes and reciprocated, while the Duchess, standing to the side, watched everything closely. The girl couldn't help but notice how beautiful Lily was. Her appearance captivated everyone from afar. As far as I remembered, the girl was about 13 years old. Beauty was obviously hereditary in the family. Suddenly, the girl stepped back and started coughing, and the blonde immediately reacted and ordered to call a doctor. The lady rushed forward. The main thing was that the head was fixed during the attacks, and that the baby could not bite her tongue. After a few minutes, the child calmed down and felt better, but her breathing remained heavy. A doctor came running. The head also needed treatment. She was accidentally bitten on the finger. She should have been more careful, as the disease can be transmitted through open wounds. The girl turned to the former slave and asked his name, although she understood that she already knew it. The man said he would be happy to be called whatever he pleased, and she smiled and called him Rumie. Initially, the lady wanted to allow the young man to go and live wherever he wanted, but upon learning that Lily was so ill, she decided to call an elf doctor she knew. Haresh hates the capital, so they will have to go to Latium. The girl had no choice. Rumie asked why they suddenly decided to grant him freedom. The heroine shrugged her shoulders. She had no motive. The girl was sorry to repeat the truth, but in fact she had only one reason, and she had already named it. The man agreed to follow the Duchess, but he did not know whether his sister's body could withstand the long journey. The lady decided to sort everything out, but she didn't know how to explain everything to Yustaf, who once again seemed to be getting even more confused. The young man turned to the hostess. She shouted that he was his own master, and then Rumie fell to his knees to apologize and had to be calmed down. The girl was curious how it happened that the young man killed all those people with ease. But she shouldn't have asked that. She stroked the guy's head. He had to go through a lot too. For now, the young man was sent off to rest. The Duchess promised to pay to count for all expenses. The girl finally got home, and when she wanted to get back into the room, she noticed Yustafa's figure in the darkness. The young man asked where his sister was, and they caught her even from the back door, which no one used. Of course, the heroine was tired and didn't want to talk about anything, but instead of pressing, the guy picked the girl up in his arms. The blonde tried to say that she could get there on her own, but no one listened to her. In the room, the hero asked what happened to his finger, but received no answer. The man still wanted to hear the story of what he and Diodia had been up to after they had left without warning. The young man wiped his hands after taking off his dirty shoes and again asked to tell him everything. The girl explained that she had learned about an acquaintance of hers who had been sold to an illegal gladiatorial arena. After days of searching for information, the lady went to pick him up. The hero's sister turned out to be ill, and so the Duchess offered her help. Mustafa shouldn't have cared how the maiden knew Rumie, because the main thing was that it wouldn't harm Latium. The girl promised not to die until her brother became the leader, but in the end she left alone, leaving the knight in the castle. The green-eyed woman understood, worrying that if something went wrong, the next morning all the newspapers would be screaming about Lazia and Arca being accomplices. The man broke down and screamed. The lady trembled, but, swallowing her insult, explained that she knew for sure that she would not have been caught. The heroine still felt cornered. She was still the leader and was not obliged to report on all her steps. If a guy is so worried, the lady will hand over this title on the day he comes of age. It means nothing to her. The girl asked for forgiveness because the truth had been said. She was tired and did not want to talk because she could not think normally. As soon as the hero left, Ron began to cry. She pretended to be strong, but for the first time she saw a person die. She was very scared. After a while, Yus came to check if his sister had left. She had fallen asleep on the sofa. The tears had dried up in her eyes. The young man exhaled and carried her into the room. Rumie still didn't believe in reality. His initial entry into the Ark arena was based on false promises. The illegal arena was horrific. You had to kill to survive, and even then the guy wasn't allowed to meet Lily. Only once was the girl shown from afar, and they said that she was getting better. It is surprising to realize that the Duchess does not need anything. Conversations about the duchy even reached the arena, where they said that the head of the family was still a woman. Rumie immediately guessed that if that lady was really the leader, she would probably ask him to kill her younger brother. The murder of an aristocrat is a criminal offense. As soon as the young man is caught, he will be immediately convicted. In the morning, it became clear that Ran had caught a cold. The maid explained that Yus had brought the Duchess into the room in the evening. It would have been nice for the lady to rest longer, but she couldn't. Because she had already slept for so long, she wanted to get up. The sister got ready and went into her brother's office. She understood that it was important to talk now. Virgo asked for forgiveness. It was wrong to devalue what is important to another person. The brunette explained that he wasn't really angry. He knew what the lady was doing. The maiden decided not to focus on the expression, so she simply said that they would take 2 more with them to Latium. The young man accidentally hit the lady on the forehead with his hand. He said that he himself did not understand why this happened. The girl started coughing, but assured them that they would be able to go to the duchy tomorrow, since by then she would feel better. Only after some time did she, the Duchess, understand that they were worried about her. All she did was talk about the place of the head. This was wrong. In the morning, everything was ready to leave. Lily, sitting in the carriage with Ran, could not help but notice her beauty. The girl was allowed to eat all the cookies that were brought. She was really cute. Her behavior was reminiscent of a small herbivore. Until the very end, Rumie did not think that the girl would turn out to be a duchess and that he would meet Laban in person the very next day. Looking closely at the young man, the red-haired man mentally prepared himself for the fact that he would have to kill him. Sometime after departure, there was a stop. The horses needed to rest, just like the people. The Duchess was helped out of the carriage, and Lily immediately rushed to her brother. Tea was brewed for the head as she was still coughing. Blue Eyes asked if his sister had ordered his murder, because the look of that man, a former slave, seemed unusual. The lady began waving her arms to assure that she did not want to become the head forever. As long as the maiden remains the ruler, she can easily get rid of her brother. She still has time. Blondie grabbed Laban by the cheeks and asked him not to scare her like that. He said that he was worried because he had to watch his words. The Duke had to ask another question. It seemed to him that the maiden knew Rumie because they were former lovers, but she gave a negative answer. The position of the head will not be under threat in any case, but also everything that is in Latium belongs to the master. Rumie continued to watch the couple. They looked like they had a good relationship, but maybe it was just a show for the audience. Lily said that Ran was good to her and even gave her some cookies that the girl had brought to share. The redhead didn't understand why they were treated so well. After everything that happened, he developed trust issues. Ran came to visit the child. She was again called the mistress, so she asked to be called simply by her first name. The young man was really very sweet. He just said her name, and the girl already felt butterflies in her stomach. Initially, the woman was planning to go for a walk, but Yus had plans, so she took advantage of the opportunity to visit her new acquaintances. When a girl looks at them, at the maids or the knights, her gaze is always the same, as if she is looking at people. Perhaps she was just a good actress. The young man did not quite understand yet. The Duchess said that they would arrive at the place in 4 days. He would have to gather his strength. The lady also asked to think of what the hero would do because he needed to somehow earn a living. The blonde could provide a standard amount to start life, but then he would have to find something to do. The young man fell to his knees and said that he would only do what he was told. The heroine exhaled. She understood Rumi's feelings. He had been deceived all his life, and then suddenly they gave him something, probably to deceive him again. The girl will have to prove everything, not only with words, but also with actions. The young man should not behave like that in front of his sister. Finally, after 4 days, the carriages arrived in Latium. In August, the heavenly estate is not as hot as the capital's. The head was getting ready when suddenly someone knocked and an assistant announced that guests had arrived. To begin with, they were taken to the reception room. Before leaving, the girl made a deal. But now there were other people in front of her. One was called Fazan, and the other Jetura. The maiden suggested addressing them informally. It was easier for them that way. After the three had drunk the offered drinks, the discussion of the visit began. They had brought armor. Everything would become clear after trying it on. If the dwarves eventually decide to hand over their mining technology, that would be wonderful. Futura said that they would not fulfill the lady's order. She found this strange. The one with whom she had made an agreement was glad to enter into a deal with a person for the first time in a long time. There is a strange echo in the mountains. Lately they are not like before. All the clans think that something will happen there. For now, with all ore mining completely stopped, the Duchess nodded and decided to put off thinking about what was about to happen for later. To begin with, it was decided to deal with the armor. The knights were asked to sort through the boxes, each belonging to a different person. Initially, the leader asked to make the armor 100% from mithril, but since this is almost impossible, it was decided to simply add this ore in small quantities. Yus was also in high spirits. He knew that the knights were probably in the process of trying them on. It would be unlikely to receive supplies from the dwarves in the future. The girl started talking about the echo and suddenly screamed. She realized the truth. We'll be talking about the Black Mountain star sand, nadium. Soon the echo will disappear and the dwarves will start working as before. Once work resumes, mineral water will gush from the deep depths, and the spirit inside will awaken and become angry. The water will swallow the mine and the underground city, and all the inhabitants of Black Mountain will be destroyed. That sand would be easier to process, but it would be stronger. The lady was glad that she remembered everything, but she did not quite understand what she should do. The green-eyed woman didn't understand how to explain everything properly. She was afraid that they wouldn't understand her. Maybe they weren't talking about the echo that she knew. The girl asked to give her time to collect her thoughts. The hero nodded and promised to ask for tea since the cough had not gone away. Rumie and Lily will not stay in the castle. The girl plans to find them a place to live, but before that she will have to contact Haresh. The girl suddenly remembered something. She jumped up and asked to wait until she came back. Just 5 minutes later, the lady was standing with flowers and some kind of box. She congratulated me on my birthday. Laban opened the package and took out a sword from there. The hero said that he liked everything and kissed the Duchess on the cheek. Immediately his face flushed. It was too close to his lips for an innocent kiss, and a strange feeling lurked inside. In fact, the man could not have imagined that anyone would congratulate him. A lot of time had passed since the last time he was congratulated. The lady thought that her brother's friends at the academy congratulated the young man on the holiday, but it seems that they did not do so. The heroine did not want to stay in the room any longer, so, again, glad that the man liked the gift, she ran out. The girl needed to pull herself together and start acting faster. She wanted to be as strong as the sage Ibria. Love and feelings make some situations unpredictable. The heart can be weak. The lady entered Rumi's room to inform her that she had knocked with the elf, but she did not know how long the journey would take. It was difficult to compare the man the girl read about in the novel with reality. He was calm, although in the novel he was always hot-tempered. The blonde gently stroked the young man's head and he kissed her palm. When she asked him not to do that again, the hero asked what was required of him. What the beauty really wanted was for the hero to become happy. He deserves it. Yustaf, Rumie, and Sheena, they all had to be happy. The Duchess wished this for everyone around her. The head went to work. She was quite tired. When she was offered to sleep in bed, she was immersed in her thoughts. The lady did not know what to do regarding Rumie, so she decided to go and consult with Yustaf. Of course, Ross followed the lady. He looked like a dog showing off his appearance after shedding. He definitely liked his new uniform. Until recently, the hero grumbled that he did not want to protect the boss, but after everything, he changed his mind. When the lady came into the office, she did not immediately find her brother. He was on the balcony and came out to ask what had happened. The girl asked about the Blue Flame Squad. It seems anyone can join it, regardless of status, as long as their abilities are good. The heroine couldn't put two words together to explain that they should take Rumie. He never spoke directly about his desire. The brunette suddenly came very close and made the girl even more embarrassed. She didn't understand what had happened. Just as quickly moving away, the Duke noticed that his sister had a fever and that they should call a doctor. There were objections. The blue-eyed man picked up the girl in his arms and was about to carry her away because he didn't want to talk to someone who was unable to determine his own condition. Ross tried to intervene, but he too was cut off. He was a fool because, being nearby, he didn't even suspect anything was wrong. The man didn't understand that the heroine didn't like it. She asked him to treat her with warmth, and that's exactly what the gentleman did. As they walked down the corridor, all the maids looked back, which made the lady even more embarrassed. The blonde was already regretting her words. There was no point in addressing her with warmth. Those were stupid words that came out of the mouth of a drunk man. Still, the green-eyed girl calmed down. She didn't want to attract even more attention. This was the wrong step. Perhaps due to fatigue, the lady wanted to act like a child. She asked him to play the piano for her, but received a promise to postpone it until next time. The conversation about the nightly detachment came up again. The lady did not ask to add Rumie by force, only by consent. When the mistress was brought in, the maids began to worry, but they were right in knowing that she would be overtired. The headmistress acted as if she was dependent on her work, which was definitely wrong on her part. Haresh's voice was heard. He, as usual, used the window instead of the regular door. It was easier for him that way. The elf grimaced when he saw the armor created by the dwarves. The relationship between the two races was so bad. Initially, the young man came to another patient, but decided to examine the lady. He immediately poked 2 fingers right under the rib cage, and it became painful. Everything immediately became clear. The hero began writing about how his mind needed to rest, and that there was too much stress concentrated in his body. The brunette wrote out a prescription that was a temporary protective measure. Now it was time to go to the real patient. Yustaf offered to go instead of his sister. She needed rest, and he himself could handle the simple task. The elf heard the question about the lady's condition again, considering her volume of work. He was surprised that everything had not yet reached the final stage. Haresh found out about Yustafa. It's time for him to start asking for medicine so that the girl will get out of action sooner. Blue Eyes asked if they would give him pills if he asked directly. The elf does not create killing agents. Lately, the man seemed to be concerned about Ran. He apparently became a supporter of the Duchess because people had such an influence on him. When the two approached, Rumie wanted to follow them, and suddenly Haresh noticed that the man smelled bad. The young man said that it was impossible to cure what the girl had in the duchy, but everything was possible. He would try. Those standing behind didn't immediately understand. The red-haired man was scared at first, but decided to clarify everything. The baby will have to be taken to the elven village, which will most likely take a lot of time. The brunette said that he would prepare everything for dispatch, but then he was interrupted. The patient would go, but her brother could not go. A few meters away from the young man, the smell of death and blood reeked, as if he were an executioner, and the smell penetrated even deeper into his body. The girl's illness cannot be cured on human soil. Even bringing one person into elven territory is difficult, and taking a second person will be even more difficult. The little girl ran to the red-haired man and, hugging him, began to scream that she did not want to be alone anymore. The elf remained calm and stated the facts. With treatment on human soil, the lady would not live even a year. The brunette didn't want to press, but left a little time for reflection, until about the next night. Yustaf couldn't smell anything at all and was confused by the fact that Rumie was so easy to read. Blue-Eyed asked the guy to come into his office so they could talk a little. It was necessary to understand where all this was leading. The brunette asked about what they had talked about with the Duchess, but they answered him with silence, since it was obviously a secret. The girl asked to give Rumie the opportunity to pass the exam to become a knight. It seems the young man knew nothing because he was surprised. He could even die during the exam, but he was determined. Soon the hero came to the lady to inform her of his decision. The guy's face expressed everything, and this frightened the lady. The red-haired man had been through a lot, but in addition to all this, he even managed to pass the exam, which was surprising. The blonde heard that Lily would have to go to the elf village. Her brother was worried, but had to be grateful that she could be cured. In the end, the man persuaded the girl to go when she recovered. In any case, they would meet again. The lady took care of the expenses. In any case, another race does not exchange human currency. The man thanked her and again called the girl mistress. This is what he himself wanted and how he himself behaved. The heroine exhaled. She had finally given her consent, but only for 6 months. This period was acceptable. After all this, the girl went to visit Yustaf and entered just as he was playing the piano. The first thing the brother asked about was security, but they reassured him that the lady was safe in the estate, and Yus also walked alone. The woman looked at the piano and asked to play again, but for some reason, almost immediately, there was a refusal. If something was wrong with Ross, the hero could assign another guard. Rumie was not suitable for this role. Virgo made one promise, but it will have to be cancelled. It was impossible to give this position to someone so reckless. In fact, Rumie wanted to belong to the lady, and not in a strange way. He had been through a lot lately. While the heroine was thinking about how to say something else, someone just poured tea into her cup. Be that as it may, one must not cross the line. The independence and protection of the head are separate issues. It was time to ask about what happened in the exam, of course. Yustaf did not give in. The victory officially belonged to Rumie. The man was acting strangely. The lady asked about jealousy, and although she knew it wasn't true, she wanted to joke about it. She froze when she heard a positive answer. She even had to ask again. Everything was so strange. The blue-eyed man was really jealous, so he asked the lady not to behave like that again. The girl decided to change the subject before she blushed even more. She decided to go to the mountains to check out some rumors. There were no other options left but to go and talk about everything personally with the dwarves. It would be suspicious for a blonde to talk about the ringing of the earth after only hearing about it once. The woman had a perfect plan, and she even knew that if everything didn't go as she wanted, she could always call upon a spirit. Yustaf asked to go with him. His sister threw up her hands. The duchy cannot be left unattended. In fact, it would be better to go together, so the lady agreed that if Rasa met the young man, it would be easier for them to build a business in the future. 2 people arrived at the estate and were greeted almost immediately by Yus, who, as usual, remained cold. One of the men introduced himself as Caruso, and the other as Daryl. They had previously been classmates. Yes's friends turned out to be simple. They talked calmly with the young man, as if they were very close. The girl went to rest for now. She still didn't believe that Fasten and Jatura had allowed her to place the village. After the situation in the mountains was resolved, the lady intended to focus on courting Lathium. In the morning, Lily went to the elves. It was hard to watch the farewell and how she held back her tears. It would have been good if the brother had gone with the girl, but they were not allowed to do so. The lady felt guilty that, being the mistress, she could not do anything. The lady went to Rumie, who at that time, as usual, was training on the battlefield. The 7th opponent had already been called to him. The body must have been in bad condition already, and he wanted to refuse, but the man could not disobey the commander's order. The brunette was going to knock the redhead out with one blow, which would be easier for both of them. When Rumie had given all his strength and was about to win, Blaine stopped him and called for a healer for one of the team. When the body was examined, it became clear that not everything was so bad. At that moment, the lady arrived. She was surprised by what was happening. Injuries during training were common, but Blaine couldn't help but notice that Rumie was out of control. When the captain gave him his freedom, the young man decided to go wash himself. There was another reason for his departure. He didn't want to interfere. As soon as they were alone, the knight took advantage of the moment and asked about the fighter's past. Green-Eyed never told the story, because she was afraid that it would cause prejudice. Taking a deep breath and gathering her strength, the lady finally told him that Rumie had previously been a slave in an illegal arena. The words resolved a lot. It became clear why the young man only uses tactics that can kill the enemy. Knightly battles are different. There comes a time when you need to think about more than just killing. The girl asked to keep the truth a secret and asked not to worry. In the end, Rumie would become a great person. Standing underwater, the hero kept thinking, he really couldn't control himself. That same strong feeling and desire to kill came out of him. When the red-haired man met with the owner, she assured him that the knight was fine and would recover. Blaine said that it was normal to get hurt during training, and Fico didn't feel humiliated. The young man could not restrain himself and hugged the Duchess. It was a desperate movement, as if he were grabbing a rope. The lady was asked again what she wanted, but she repeated that she only wanted happiness and that she would not have to please anyone. The young man could do anything if he asked, but the lady still agreed to ask for something important later. The red-haired man was silent, but then asked if it would be necessary to kill Mr. Yustafa. He would be able to do it. The girl screamed and in shock began to ask who said that. It turned out that Rumi had simply assumed, and his thoughts were wrong. I had to explain that the Latzia family had a temporary contract and was not going to fight for the position of head of the Rand family. There was a slight misunderstanding, but since the man understood everything, the lady suggested forgetting about it and going to rest. The headmaid looked at the two and asked how well they were doing. They were about to see. The gentleman said that from the day after tomorrow, he and the head would be temporarily absent. They had their own business. The young man left, leaving his friends alone with the woman, who said that she hoped that they would study their duties well and then carry them out. The knight did not understand why he was driving the carriage. It was obvious that the newcomer should have been riding in front and not on the horse at the side. The red-haired man turned and asked if he needed to drive the carriage. Apparently the man was tired, so they could swap. Thus began the journey to the Dwarven Kingdom. The delegation had a minimum number of participants. It was impossible to go to the village with a squad of knights. Having borrowed a carriage from the Golden Rose, they pretended to be merchants, which made it much easier to cross the border. Eustace suggested that the lady switch to a horse. After all, she needed to learn and practice riding. It could help in the future. After a while, the blonde was finally able to climb onto the horse, but then realized that she couldn't get off. Her legs and back were starting to hurt. The first thing the girl did upon arrival was fall onto the bed and couldn't get back up. However, if she continues to ride, things will improve in the future and progress will be made. Rumi came into the room. He thought that he could give the girl a massage to help her relax. She shrugged her shoulders, because she didn't want that. The young man calmly explained that he would do a massage on her clothes, but if nothing was done, the girl would suffer even more the next day. For greater peace of mind, it was decided that the maid would remain in the room. There was no choice, and the lady agreed. After a while, the woman passed out, as usually happens after a journey, and she let the young man, Dimidius, go. The blonde thought, even though she was sent by the Green Shadow, she began to like Ran, so she didn't want anyone to get close to her with evil intentions. The next day, the dwarf took us to the village to see everything. The place was truly mesmerizing in its beauty. The girl met with Raktu, the head of the Black Mountain, who complimented her hair and said that he knew where to get gold of the same color. Usually the race would brag at the first meeting, thus declaring itself it was in their blood, such a peculiarity. The lady had no answer but to calmly reply that she wanted to see the dwarves' tactics since she had no abilities. No matter how well everything is made, if there is no demand, everything would be wrong and out of place. The woman decided to get down to business. They definitely needed to discuss the mountain ringing as soon as possible. That was precisely why they had come. When the lady had already sat down at the table, she suggested that Yustav go and rest, but he refused, justifying this by saying that he also had the right to hear the conversation. The blonde started from afar. Something like a mineral water breakthrough could happen soon. Perhaps the spirit inhabiting the mountain was about to awaken. Of course, the lady could only find out for sure by entering the cave, but she also asked to take into account that she was the mistress of the ice wall. The green-eyed one didn't need to rest. She needed to check everything quickly to figure out how to convince the dwarves to evacuate. Yas followed his sister and was right not to leave her alone because an hour later they met with failure. Raktu led the two inside. They had gone far enough, and he wanted to go even further so he would know where to go. A bright sound was heard which resembled the roar of a whale, and a second later, the ring on the Duke's neck began to glow. Suddenly an earthquake started and the floor suddenly disappeared. It seemed they were locked in a mine. The young man said he was not injured, but he could smell blood. The girl carefully began to feel the young man's body to find a wound. She exhaled when she found nothing. When Yustav tried to move, a heavy sigh was heard. It turned out that he had been hit, or more precisely, his back had been hit. Blue Eyes didn't pay attention to this, and, instead of taking care of himself, in response he examined the lady's body. She was fine. It was dark all around. The girl was about to go forward, carefully holding onto the wall, and lead Yustafa behind, but he turned out to be more resourceful and summoned a blue flame. After some time, another mine was found. Things were scattered there. It was surprising that at least something useful remained. The bag contained dried bread, some stone mining equipment, and alcohol in a flask. The girl disinfected the wound with the drink. All that was left was not to overexert herself. They didn't have any ointment anyway. The young man shouldn't have followed his sister, but he had a different opinion. He was calm, because he didn't leave Ran completely alone. The blonde promised not to die and repeated again that nothing would happen to her. They would get out. They walked on. Fortunately, Rumiha had gotten used to the pain in her ankle, which she discovered completely by accident. Finally, they found themselves near the water. It seemed to be rising up. The mineral spring could explode at any moment, and then Ran and Yustaf would be the first to die. But he didn't seem to be worried. The blonde asked to hold hands and said the name Shal. When he asked who was calling him, she introduced herself as a reader. The girl came to ask for a favor. She wanted to get out and do something with the city so that they could survive. The woman was angry that they came to her only for profit, but she quickly calmed down, because it was quite funny. Istalif also came with the lady. She smelled of the ice wall. Shael asked to tell what they had read about her. The story was told that the city would sink underwater, and then a crystal called Nadium would appear. Green-Eyed wouldn't want a relationship where they would talk to each other only for the sake of benefit. Suddenly the spirit laughed. She became interested in what was inside the stranger's head. She was behaving unusually. Suddenly, Yustafa's sharp voice was heard. This made her eyes open and the girl was immediately hugged. They found themselves on the surface. The hero did not understand what had happened, because after the lady said something, they were both pulled under the water. The girl explained that she met with Shael because of her the mineral water was supposed to explode. She said that the blue flame that Yus possessed was preventing them from going together. The young man noticed that when the heroine tried to get up, her leg hurt. After taking off her shoe, he realized that there was indeed a huge bruise. Yus picked up the lady in his arms and carried her forward. Her ankle needed a little rest, as it really hurt. The girl began to fear that she would never be able to stand on her feet again, but she was assured that everything would be fine. Lost in thought, the woman asked why the brunette didn't like brother-sister relationships, and he said that it was simply unrealistic from the very beginning. Blue Eyes asked if Ran wanted to consider him her real younger brother. Perhaps it would be easier for her to get used to him that way. The young man calmly said that they had a relationship between a man and a woman. The sister laughed. It was all a little unusual. The blonde offered to be friends, but she was refused. She really didn't understand who they were to each other. Although the lady worked diligently for Latium, she will not be allowed to stay there. She will have to start a new life as a new person. A tear rolled down her cheek. Be that as it may, the heroine had spent a long time in the duchy, and after arriving in the new world, she had become most attached to this place. The girl was carefully pressed closer to him, which made things even worse, and the tears started rolling down at double speed. Even though Yus might belong to Sheena someday, right now, the girl will only borrow him for a short time. After crying, everything cleared up in her head, and the lady asked for forgiveness. The hero only asked to tell her right away next time if something hurts. As they approached the city, the cries of Knight Ross were heard. He ran up and began asking questions. As it turned out, Rumie also arrived with the man, and he calmly asked the same thing. There was blood on his fingers. It seemed something had happened. The red-haired man reported that a spirit had appeared, and he said that he had sent the lady and her companion into a nearby lake. Finally, the carriage set off back. The girl almost immediately fell asleep and rested her head on it, while her companion thought about what had happened. Already in the village of Black Mountain, the woman conveyed everything that the spirit had told her and said that, in general, she was fine. The leader breathed a sigh of relief. The lady's lover had put in a lot of effort when the collapse occurred. He began to dig down with his bare hands. Later, the doctor examined Ran's leg and said that it looked like the bone was damaged, and she might have to limp for the rest of her life. But maybe everything would be okay. Shael appeared. She offered to help when the leader saw her, greeted her, and she, in response, asked to call her by her name, Nadium. The gentleman wanted to pay himself. The lady prevented the city from being flooded, especially since she was a guest. The woman easily healed the girl's leg, and then the boys' backs and arms. She asked them not to dig in her direction anymore, as the dwarves were too noisy. She liked the flowers, so the inhabitants gathered to throw them into the lake once a year, and the lady also gave Ran a small gift. Romia froze because Nadium was in her hands, after which the spirit said goodbye and evaporated. After all, it was quite an interesting conversation. Immediately, everyone around began to examine the stone. The lady is not someone who knows about different types of stones. so she wanted to leave Nadium in the city. After the negotiations, the girl went to bed, and the next morning, when she woke up, she found out that Yus was training with Rumie. The brunette soon realized that his opponent was showing his thirst for killing. Of course, it was interesting to fight him, but it was also very annoying. Perhaps the best option would be to simply kill the man. The optimal option would be to destroy all the insects in advance. When the hero attacked more strongly, the red-haired man wanted to destroy him. But this desire quickly subsided when he remembered his mistress. The girl came to check how things were going. She wanted to make sure that the wounds were okay and no longer hurt. The young man again addressed the lady as the hostess. The lady did not know how to explain to him. She felt guilty that she could not save him in time. Looking straight into Rumie's eyes, the Duchess said that he did not look like someone who would simply wait for his master like a dog. Yus appeared from behind and interrupted everything. After all, you can't ruin the authority, you should remember what the girl's status is. The dwarf came running when the lady went to talk to him. The red-haired man told the gentleman that he would protect the one who saved him. It turned out that they didn't yet have the strength to control Nadium, they just needed a little more time. This was important to them, but the girl said that she was already thinking about going back. Perhaps the lady would come alone and would have stayed longer, but there was no one left in the duchy. The man nodded and promised to convey the news to the head. The detachment would return to Latium only in a day. Everyone agreed with this, although Rumie still believed that they could stay longer. The woman suggested that Yustaf return alone first, but he did not want to let his sister out of his sight. Soon after they parted, the Duke returned to suggest they explore the village to make more memories. Dia, standing behind, was invited to join, but she declined, saying that it was better for them to go alone. Ross couldn't either, because he was ultimately tasked with sending the documents to the head of the dwarves. Not understanding the hints, the lady asked to go and pick up Rumie, and so they walked through the city. It seemed the lady had gotten hold of a map of the area somewhere. The girl brought her friends to the forge to look at the swords, and they were immediately met by the owner, who immediately recognized the one who had recently saved their village. The brunette quickly became interested in Yustaf's weapon, since it was made by elves, and he wanted to look at the scabbard and blade closer. When Yus handed over the thing, the owner seemed to go crazy and started asking a million questions. It all got to the point that he offered to exchange the sword for his. Laban refused. He stated that he would not exchange his gift for anything else, although he did not consider elves better than dwarves. The girl didn't know that people were so easily excited, but as soon as they heard who had given the thing, they immediately dispersed. It was time to leave. They met with the chief for dinner and discussed the fact that the Duchess would soon leave the village. The leader asked how old the girl was, and when he found out that she was 20, he laughed. Compared to the age of the dwarves, this was considered a completely childish age. It was decided to hold a celebration. Before this, the old man asked about the age so that he could later bring many barrels of alcohol. Now the girl was declared a friend of the dwarves. She could not help but rejoice at this, and she hoped that the friendship would last as long as possible. A necklace of stones and white jade was made for Miss, and a piece of jewelry was also created that perfectly fits her wrist. The girl saved the lives of the entire village. They wanted to repay her with at least something and sincerely hoped that the maiden would accept them. After a while, the Duchess became drunk. For dwarves, alcohol was not strong, but for humans, even one glass was considered too much. Yus wanted to escort the lady to the room, but Rumi stepped forward and also volunteered, and the Duchess decided to ask the red-haired man for help. When the guy carried the lady into the room, she noticed how he smiled. Why before he always hid his emotions, although he could behave according to his desires? The lady laughed. She would never hate the young man because she knows him well. He is an excellent person. No matter what difficulties may arise, or what sadness may come, the hero will choose what he believes in and will not give up. A young man should not try to force himself to please his mistress. After all, she does not deserve such treatment. Domitia ran into the room. The man explained that everything was fine. The most important thing was that he did not intend to harm my lady. At night, the green-eyed girl got up and went to get a drink, but realized that she couldn't lift the bucket because it was full of water. Yustaf appeared and helped, but everything inside the girl was burning. In dwarven culture, one cannot refuse drinks, so she had to drink. Still, the result was not bad. They went through a lot, but it was still definitely worth it. Perhaps the blue-eyed man still wanted to stay in the village for a few days. The maiden did not agree. Home is always better. It turned out that the Duke was outside because the reception had just ended and he was going to get some fresh air and go to rest. Yustaf was a little drunk, having had several drinks, but it was hard to tell from his stony face. The conversation turned to what the lady would like. She would like to remain in Latium even after she hands over her post as head. The man remained silent, and the heroine assumed that this meant a direct refusal, but she was stopped. The hero actually had a condition. He was going to tell everything after he officially became the ruler. The woman could not imagine what was going on, and in order not to think anymore, she decided to go on vacation. Finally, the guys went to Latium. On the way home, Rumi had a sparring match with Ross, and he lost mercilessly. After this, the knight asked for new battles, but lost each time. Even this time, he wished to fight again. During the journey, Dia began to please the mistress even more. The distance became closer than with other servants. The girl was always nearby, and when she grumbled, even that was to Rumia's liking. She didn't mind. Rumia's style of speech and actions also changed. He stopped following the Duchess's reactions and began to speak more honestly. The maids didn't understand why their mistress started working immediately after returning home. She needed a little time to rest. It would be difficult to take a break in the man's presence, but he only told the lady to pretend he wasn't there. Still, the redhead also found something to do. The girl asked him to make the report himself, without Ross's help, so that he would look better in Blaine's eyes. Perhaps the reason for the changes was something Ran had said, but after the night she didn't remember anything at all. The girl decided not to think about it anymore. She invited the maids to look at the new jewelry from the dwarves. In addition to the gifts, the heroine received from Ribori a box containing a new identity document. In 2 months, Yustaf was to become an adult. There was no fear of leaving, but only for a moment did the lady think that she could fulfill the condition and stay in the estate. Preparations for winter in Latium were in full swing, and they discussed all the details and upcoming events with the Duke. Caruso said that the duchy had a lot of cash left and suggested borrowing it. The lady shrugged. She did not like the financial business. The woman did not know whether she agreed to what her brother was offering her. In the future, she would not be able to ensure that what she wanted was fulfilled. Yustafa's hard work was finally paying off, and they could now live in peace and the residents could be happier. The lady remembered about the infection. The problem is that the future has changed. Yus from the original was lazy with Lindbog's daughter. She died without having time to do anything. Then Lacia was going through dark times. Then Sheena came, and when she found the crystals, everything became much better. Yustafa's feelings also arose because the girl was his savior. Now everything has changed. The woman never thought about the future. She was afraid that she had accidentally changed what was supposed to happen in the world. The man pulled the girl out of her thoughts. She said that she herself didn't notice how she accidentally started cutting the plate instead of meat. The blonde tried to calm down. Even if Sheena and Yustaf don't fall in love, this will be their road and story. When asked what she was thinking, the lady quickly laughed, explaining that she was thinking about relationships. Winter has arrived, usually a time for rest, as preparations were completed just before the start. The brunette reported on the winter hunt. The thing is that monsters are descending from the ice wall and they need to be destroyed. This used to be done before the young lady arrived, but my father stopped this tradition, and after that, in winter, from time to time, a mountain of monsters appears under the mountain. After returning from the winter hunt, there would be a coming-of-age celebration. This year, it was necessary to gather all the knights and make everything as grand as possible. Perhaps the upcoming event was supposed to be the perfect opportunity to stage a formal presentation of the young man's powers. The Duchess said it was a good idea, and with that, the brother felt he had been officially given permission. The green-eyed girl simply hoped for the best, but she was asked not to think about problems because she already worries too often. Virgo wasn't used to people killing so easily, and she didn't intend to get used to it. She just hoped to take it more calmly. Later, the heroine went to Rumie to ask if he would go hunting, but he didn't immediately understand. The red-haired man had no intention of going anywhere without his mistress. He believed that he should always be by her side. The man brought up the topic of the lady's departure from the duchy. It was she who raised Latium from its knees. The Duke's blood does not flow in her, but the girl is listed as a relative. The lady moved closer and assured him that it would be fine, as she had also filled her second pocket, and that she did not particularly want to lose her place as Duchess. Still, the hero did not understand what the point was. From the very beginning, the lady did not want to be the head, but only did what she worked. The girl suggested that they go and rest a bit, but the young man turned away. She probably had a lot of tasks again. Still, Rumie had a sweet side. The heroine laughed. They would still go for a walk. She would work at night. The first thing they did was go sledding, which turned out to be much more fun. The owner acted like a little child. She ran in the other direction into the snow. They laughed and enjoyed the time together. When the lady came back to the castle and told what had happened, Yus only asked if she was okay. The blonde decided not to linger long. The hot water was already ready, and she was about to go and rest. Rumi was called into the office for a talk, and it turned out that Blaine was worried that the knight did not understand his place on the hunt. At first, the gentleman thought that the chief had picked up a dog that was only out to kill, but it seemed he had gotten too used to the collar. The young man shrugged his shoulders. Rand said that she liked him. Yus decided to give advice. He recommended to refrain from delusions. Rumie was not obliged to be present at the winter hunt. The man did not care. It was another person's choice. Still, after Rand's persuasion, the boy became a member. She hoped that he would take advantage of the opportunity and feel a sense of belonging to the blue flame. Before Yus left, the lady handed him a lamp. It was created by the dwarves, and since the thing was expensive, the girl asked him to return it to her. After the knight's departure, the estate became noticeably empty. This year, the lady was burdened with even more work. She constantly sat in her office. Rand wanted to prepare everything properly. It was the right thing to do, at least for her. The girl sincerely wished that the new year would remain unforgettable in the memories of everyone who would be present at the ball. One wonderful morning, Dia announced that the knights were finally due to arrive from hunting, and the lady could hardly wait. When the lady saw the first horse and Mustafa on it, she rushed forward to welcome him back. New Year's Day arrived, the head greeted everyone who had gathered, and the knights and guests arrived one after another. The event, which began quickly, lasted all night from December 31st to January 1st. At exactly 12 midnight, the girl bowed her head and said, "Hail, Blue Flame." She was happy to hand over the rights to Yustaf. Immediately, everyone around began to praise the new leader. Rand smiled, because what was happening gave her pleasure. Coming closer to the lady, the young man asked if she would give him her first dance of the new year. The answer, of course, was positive. The brunette noticed that he didn't think that the rights to the head's place would pass right there in the hall, but this was the best moment, because there were many familiar people around. The blonde herself didn't fully believe what was happening. It was obviously the last time she would hear someone address her as you. While the heroine was trying to express her true feelings, Yustaf suddenly said that he was actually worried. Now that the lady no longer has anything holding her in Lathium, she can suddenly leave this place. She promised that she would listen to the condition. After half the evening was over, the lady could barely walk. She was constantly invited to dance, which made her very tired. The girl met Rumie. She herself was not good at dancing, but she offered to lend him one dance, only after a drink that gave her strength. When they went out onto the balcony and got into position, Rand started laughing. She was very drunk. For now they will dance however they want, and later they will assign a real teacher to him. An hour later, when the lady sat down to rest, Yustaf came. It turned out that his sister was there with Rumie, but he went for food. The gentleman wanted to talk, but in such a state he would most likely not be understood. The girl would be better off going to bed. The woman did not agree. She took Lazia to a secluded place and asked her to tell her everything. It seemed that the conversation would be about a proposal. She already understood this. The girl insisted to the last that the young man tell her everything, and he gave in. She would be excluded from the family records of the duchy. In a second, her mind sobered up. Rand should have understood that this is what they would tell her, but for some reason, she still felt offended. The lady was about to leave, but she was stopped. Her story was not finished, because she had the right to take anything with her. Everything that was achieved through the efforts and labor of the lady, she had the right to take with her. There was no problem with that. The lady screamed. She never wanted this, and now she didn't know how to explain her feelings. Tears streamed down her cheeks on their own. The lady couldn't believe that they really hadn't gotten closer, and that they weren't giving her another chance. The young man tried to calm the Duchess down, for now he was giving her the opportunity to go wherever she wanted, but if she didn't do so, she would have no choice. An offer followed. The lady could either leave or refuse, whatever Romija's choice. Yustaf would not be able to pretend that the feelings did not exist. Previously, they were relatives only on paper. This is no longer the case, and the hero could not contain his feelings inside, so that the lady would not think that this was a dream. He gently kissed her hand, making her blush. When the young man left and gave her 2 days to think about it, the woman began to wonder where his feelings for her came from, and that was when she realized that there were all the prerequisites for this. Rumie came, and it seemed he heard everything. They didn't have time to talk before Dia appeared in the corridor. She saw tears in the lady's eyes and asked her to come with her to the room. The Duchess did not understand what was happening to her. The future was unclear. The first New Year's Eve turned destructive. The girl told Demidia about what had happened. She seemed to know everything, only the lady did not suspect about her feelings. The blonde tried to understand what was wrong and why the lady continued to cry, but it was difficult. The lady didn't understand herself, but she was promised that if she wanted to leave, Dia and Rumie would immediately help her. For some reason, my soul felt a little calmer, all thanks to the care of my loved ones. Initially, the Duchess did not even allow herself to think about a love relationship with the young man. She was a heroine who traumatized him since childhood. When the main character appeared, Romy understood that someone like her would be immediately forgotten and not remembered. The girl said that feelings could still change, considering that they were brother and sister, but the maid said that no one thought so. The assistant came up with a solution that the lady could use at the meeting of the heads of the family. The next morning, the preparations were completed, and the maid suggested that at all costs they simply remain silent and observe from the sidelines. Yustaf met the lady and noticed that she was, as usual, beautiful. She immediately blushed. The brunette understood that he didn't have the right to put too much pressure on him yet, forcing him to make a choice while he needed to leave himself time. The girl was silent at the table, while the young man talked about what everyone already knew. The first thing the head wanted to do was to exclude Ran from the family. Elizabeth asked why this happened. The lady had been trying all this time. Baron Lance also spoke up in defense of the girl, but the gentleman said that expulsion was inevitable. The Duchess calmly explained that she had been given time to think about whether to leave or stay, and whether to take another title. After the negotiations were concluded, Wilde and Lance approached the Duchess to apologize for what happened. They actually wanted the woman to stay in Latium, although it was also clear that she had her own thoughts on the matter. After that, the Illuminate approached. This time Rand told the story with the proposal, and he reacted calmly, considering it a good development of events. It seemed that everyone in the hall intended to see the head, because she saw Yustafa in the corridor. The woman decided to give an answer. She liked the hero, but not as a man, because initially she had not thought about such a relationship. Still, the blonde wanted to stay. The proposed conditions were still in force, so she agreed. The Countess had the right to take the lands for herself, and she informed the servants that she would stay only on the condition that they move to another estate. A small detachment was heading to the ceremony, the first event after the New Year's celebration. Yustaf announced that he intended to grant the title with permission to enter the castle, so the lady would be able to stay in the Sky Manor. No one has ever climbed to the top of the mountain. The higher you go, the colder it gets. The frost penetrates to the very bones. When the two came to check the wall, it became clear almost immediately that darkness was awakening, but this was too early an awakening. According to the original, Lindbog did not perform the ceremony so as not to confirm the existence of the blue flame. To understand what had changed, the woman asked her brother to look through all the records in the archives. It was decided to return to the castle as quickly as possible as the weather had worsened and become strange. Yus asked to be more careful on the horse. Because of the snowstorm, nothing could be seen. The girl fell from the animal and found herself completely alone. She could not find any of her companions. Rayan heard the sound and was scared. But very soon she realized that it was Yustaf. He had arrived to save her. With the help of the blue flame, the young man saved his sister, and so they arrived at the estate, where they were met. The girl was almost immediately sent into warm water. She asked about the others, and it seemed the rest remained okay. Hearing that the blue flame was used, the lady jumped up to check on Yus, but she was stopped. He was safe. There is a fee for using powers. The hero must have spent a lot of energy creating a tall pillar. Still, having gotten ready, albeit a little later, the lady went to visit the head. Yustaf said that he did not feel very bad. The chief had other things to do, and he wanted the beauty to rest a little first, so he got ready to leave. Before leaving, the man gently kissed the woman on the cheek and promised that they would see each other later. It seems that all the knights returned safe and sound, but the horse from which the lady fell can no longer be found, because she got scared and most likely ran away in the opposite direction. Rumier always wanted to be close to his mistress, yet she was constantly getting into trouble, although no one knew that a natural disaster would happen. Nevertheless, the lady agreed to go only with the knight from now on so that if anything happened, she would be safe. The girl brought Yustafa a tray of soup, and almost immediately Rand noticed that she was being called sister again, apparently because it made her heart flutter even more. They decided to discuss what happened again. The lady would like to forget about what happened, but they got into trouble. The lady had never said she liked Latium before, but now she almost died trying to escape the snowstorm. It would not have been possible to keep Ran with wealth and power, but she did not run away and remained close. The woman brought the young man out of his thoughts by saying that they should begin investigating the ice wall. The hero agreed, but the Duchess was only embarrassed by the fact that they were treating her coldly again, even though they were talking about love. When the lady asked, she was told that she was the most precious person, and these were the right words. If you think about it, the woman understood that there was noise on the border wall. It was time to remove the seal from Ibria. Rumier suggested that the lady take a short walk, just so that she could calmly think about everything. She needed time. After the New Year celebrations, everyone was busy, so they hardly met. Now they could talk. The girl explained why she decided to stay in the kingdom. More people than expected kept her. While the lady was speaking, the young man remembered Yustav's words. He asked him not to be mistaken about the lady and her attitude. The girl looked a lot like the one selling candy. She's actually quite pretty. Rumier asked if the beauty wanted to leave Latium, even for a while. She laughed, because she didn't want to freeze in a snowstorm. The girl looked at the book, although in reality, due to the order of the pages, nothing was clear. It was quite difficult. Since the end of the storm, there had been only clear weather, but the lady did not have time to enjoy it, because she again spent all her time in the library. The blonde wasn't going to give up so easily. She was going to sort everything out perfectly. It seems the lady has found 300-year-old records detailing conversations with the conquering emperor. Yustav sat nearby and listened, but in the heroine's head he was too attractive. It made her feel embarrassed. At the moment when the gentleman first confessed his feelings to the beauty, and when he began to show them, the lady did not know how to behave. The man had his own thoughts. From the moment he began to press a little more, he wanted to ask about everything in turn. In March, winter was still raging in Latium. A messenger arrived from the imperial palace. He arrived with news. The blonde learned that His Majesty had left this world, and she was surprised, because in the book he was still alive even when Sheena arrived. Olivia probably changed her plans. The woman convinced herself that she just needed to calm down. Since Luz became emperor, his wife became empress. Be that as it may, the new king is against the duchy. It was interesting to see how he would act. The young man would not have been able to attend the coronation ceremony anyway. He was planning to go to the capital later and asked Blaine to check on the Blue Flame Night Squad. Now, since Yustav became the head, the maiden had no right to interfere and contradict his words. They believed in the woman's strength. She would be able to overcome all the difficulties in any case, even though they didn't have any hope. As soon as the knights left, Rand pounced on Yustav, asking why he didn't take her with him, knowing that he needed trusted people. The man simply did not want his sister and the king to meet, and now that he has become the main man in the kingdom, he will try to take possession of what he could not get before. Rand became an ordinary countess, which only worsened the situation. She officially became the young man's weakness. In fact, the blue-eyed man was happy that he became the head for another reason. His sister would no longer have to deal with negativity. A week later, Yustav packed up and left. They tried to persuade him to take Blaine with him, but the knights stayed to defend Latium if necessary. Fortunately, the countess was so busy that she didn't have time even for ordinary worries. Life went on as usual. Romia's first duty was to maintain relations with the dwarves, and they visited the palace. The heroine was glad to see familiar faces, but she never expected to meet so many of their race. They were much more determined than it seemed at first, but only the words about future plans made them realize that not everything was so simple. While the dwarves were preparing to build a temporary shelter, Latium was obliged to provide them with food and some other amenities. There were plans to launch some already made products, but there were bound to be some problems with them as well. After the war with Latium, the Marquis put a lot of pressure on the masters, so they broke the contract and left, all thanks to rumors that in the duchy they would be connected with the Golden Rose organization. It was decided to create not a new guild of magicians, but a guild for the production of magical items from ice crystals. Lydia was asked to head the organization, and she agreed. The Countess was happy for her, but Francis decided to stay in Latium. Time, however, flew by too quickly. April began. The wind no longer burned my face, and shoots began to grow among the remaining snow. Unfortunately, no letters came from Yustav, and the girl even felt sorry that he didn't have instantaneous movement magic. There were spells in the world that were forbidden because of their creator. Magic was not supposed to contradict the rules of the physical. For some reason, no matter how busy the lady was, she constantly thought about Yustafa, as if she could not get him out of her head. The girl made a plan, and according to the plan, she went to check on the villagers. Thanks to the devices that were given to them, they all survived. They thanked the heroine very much for the kindness she had shown, and they were pleased to be listened to. The lady, in a sense, understood why kings always traveled hiding their identity. They did not want publicity. Mrs. Rand completed the plan with a check. She was not obliged to go on her own, but she still decided to do so. Blaine had previously heard from Eustace that he had proposed to Rand and she had refused, but now, being nearby, he saw her sincere feelings. The man decided to ignore this, since everyone has their own path. The conversation turned to what Lazia would do next. In various places, as it turned out, estates had been built for the family, and at night they were going to rest in one of them. The Duke was mocked in the castle, but the methods were as pathetic as usual. Nothing new happened. Olivia's voice was heard, which distracted him from his work. The Emperor was busy. He had gone to meet the Baron's wife. The heroine offered to talk to her, so they went to drink tea. The woman took a long time to get to the point she wanted to say. Rand needed to convey it to the Emperor in simple words. The question remained open. Eustace did not care whether he received recognition for Latium or not. The man did not want to stay at the table, so he bowed out, making Olivia angry.